Okay, we have gone live. Let us start.
Yeah.
So, this is Malavika from Pune Collective, and I welcome you all in the 12th session of Pune Collective. Just a brief introduction who we are, we are all gathered together as working professionals and concerned citizens in Pune who have come together to form Pune Collective. Basically aiming to bring democratic, peaceful voices on a platform that champion the ideals of freedom, pluralism, secularism, tolerance, and social justice. So again, welcome to all of you. Today, as we know, all of us everywhere, universally, I guess, the COVID-19 outbreak has shaken the world, we knew. While we are still fighting for basic health infrastructures, beds, medical oxygen, medicines in midst of this, we have also seen series of horrifying incidents in West Asia. Israel's 11-day bombardment of Gaza killed nearly 250 Palestinians, including at least 65 children, leaving behind many buildings, homes, and infrastructure destroyed in the besieged enclave. And on Israel's side, 12 people were killed in rocket fire from Gaza Strip. Israel is moving towards the complete occupation of East Jerusalem by attacking Palestinians who were protesting its attempt to forcefully expel residents of Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Israeli forces raided Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, injured hundreds of people praying in the mosque during the month of Ramadan. Netanyahu, who had repeatedly failed to win a majority in the Israeli elections, launched these attacks for petty political gains and to cover up the government's failure to protect people from raging COVID pandemic. These acts of Israel are in gross violation of human rights and various resolutions passed by the UN. Pune Collective denounces Israeli attacks on Palestinians. Pune Collective stands with Palestinians who are engaging in righteous struggle for liberation and join all those who are demanding an end to Israeli occupation. The layers of hardship in Gaza keep getting thicker because the very basis of conflict has not been addressed. We believe that current ceasefire does not resolve the question. Palestinians continue to face violence from Israeli occupation forces, and it's not going to end until the occupation comes to an end. The fight concerns all those who are attached to the value of justice, dignity, and law. It is against this background that we welcome all of you for today's session, Palestine, the Burning Voices. There's a warm welcome I want to give to all of us who are our speakers as well as the audience who is waiting to hear. Now I'm going to introduce we have three eminent speakers today, and we're very, very fortunate and lucky to have all three of here. Let me introduce all of them one by one. The first speaker we have Niru Damle. Niru Damle sir have been writing for last 40 years. He wrote innumerable articles in Marathi and Hindi, traveled all over India and some 20 countries, and written 20 books in Marathi. He has written over 70 blogs and published 30 video film short and edited by himself. He has worked with a wide variety of NGOs, studied political and social activities in India over 30 years. He is also visiting faculty for journalism for many reputed universities. निरू दामले सर, तुमचं खूप खूप स्वागत आहे. मी थोडं मराठीमध्ये पण बोलणार आहे. सो निरू दामले सर हे गेल्या 40 वर्षापासून लिहित आहेत आणि त्यांनी मराठी आणि हिंदीमध्ये बरीच आर्टिकल्स लिहिलेली आहेत. त्यांनी जवळजवळ बरेच वर्ष ते पूर्ण भारतभर त्यांचं ट्रॅव्हल झालेलं आहे. ते ट्रॅव्हल्ड इंडिया फॉर लास्ट सो मेनी इयर्स आणि जवळजवळ 20 देशांमध्ये ते फिरलेले आहेत. त्याचबरोबर त्यांनी जवळजवळ 20 मराठी पुस्तकं मराठीमध्ये लिहिलेली आहेत. त्यांचे 70 ब्लॉग्स आहेत आणि 30 फिल्म शूट केलेले आहेत. त्यांनी स्वतः एडिटिंग पण केलेलं आहे आणि स्वतः त्यांचं शूटिंग पण केलेलं आहे. बऱ्याच वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारच्या एनजीओज बरोबर काम केलेलं आहे आणि गेल्या 30 वर्षामधल्या ज्या भारतातल्या राजकीय आणि सामाजिक ज्या ऍक्टिव्हिटीज आहेत त्यांचा अभ्यास त्यांनी केलेला आहे आणि बऱ्याच नामांकित विद्यापीठांमध्ये त्यांनी जर्नलिझमचं व्हिजिटिंग फॅकल्टी म्हणून काम केलेलं आहे. सर, तुमचं खूप खूप स्वागत. After that, I'm going to also introduce our second speaker who has joined directly from Palestine, Ms. Arwa Abu Hashash. Arwa is a Palestinian researcher and a member of the Palestinian People's Party. For 8 years, she worked for Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, MAS, which is based in Ramallah, Palestine. She is the assistant editor of the International and is on the editorial board of the Future of Internationalism. Arwa, very warm welcome to you. We have the third speaker who has joined us from the US, Vijay Prashad. He's an historian, author, editor, and journalist. He's a writing fellow and chief correspondent at Globetrotter. He is the chief editor of Leftward Books and the director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He's a senior non-resident fellow at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, Renmin University of China. He has written more than 20 books, including The Darker Nations and The Poorer Nations. A great welcome to Vijay and all three of you. We are going to start the session. I'm just going to give you a kind of a structure that we are going to follow. What we are going to do is, first, Niru Damle sir is going to speak for 20 minutes. Each one of you are going to speak for 20 minutes. First, we'll start with Niru Damle sir. Then I'll request Arwa to speak, and then I'm going to request Vijay to take over. Let us begin with निरू दामले सर. तुम्हाला रिक्वेस्ट करते निरू दामले सर की तुम्ही तुमचं जे भाषण आहे ते सुरू करावं, व्याख्यान आहे ते सुरू करावं. आम्ही जेव्हा दामले सरांशी बोलत होतो तेव्हा आम्ही त्यांच्याशी हे बोलत होतो की ह्या विषयावरती भारताचा काही एक स्टँड राहिलेला आहे आजपर्यंत. म्हणजे अगदी 1947 पासून आपण बघितलं तर हा स्टँड राहिलेला आहे, गांधी, नेहरू आणि आजपर्यंत. आणि आता अलीकडे जेव्हा हा गाझाचा अटॅक झाला त्याच्यानंतर जे परमनंट जे रिप्रेझेंटेटिव्ह आहेत UN मध्ये त्यांनी पण एक स्टँड घेऊन केलं की 2 नेशन थेअरी बद्दलचा स्टँड घेतला, पण त्याच्यामध्ये काही एक विशिष्ट प्रकारची भूमिका घेतलेली आहे जी 1947च्या नंतरचा बराच त्याच्यामध्ये बदल झालेला आपल्याला दिसतो. आणि हा जो बदल आहे आणि 1947 पासून ते आजपर्यंतचा काय प्रवास राहिलेला आहे याच्याबद्दलचा खूप अभ्यास दामले सरांनी केलेला आहे. ते कायम त्या सगळ्या घडामोडी ज्या घडलेल्या आहेत इंटरनॅशनल लेवलवरती त्याबद्दल ते सजग राहिलेले आहेत आणि लिहित आलेले आहेत. सो आय विल रिक्वेस्ट दामले सर, प्लीज ओव्हर टू यू.
Thank you. Arwa and my friend, forgive me, I'll talk in Marathi. Okay, somebody might help you little later because I'm very comfortable with my language. And moreover, I have been traveling all around the world. I had been to Jenin and Ramallah in 2000, 20 years ago. And I looked at it from my own point of view. See, because I live in Maharashtra. So I look at it from my own point of view, my own analysis. So I'm comfortable in my language right now. Maybe we can talk later in English. हे खरं आहे की मी 2000 साली पहिल्यांदा जेनिन मध्ये गेलो आणि रामल्ला मध्ये होतो, जेरुसलेमला होतो. जेरुसलेम, ईस्ट जेरुसलेम हे मी पाहिलेलं आहे तिकडलं सगळं पाहून. आणि मला आधी जे तुम्ही सांगितलं ते खरं आहे की लोकांना ह्या सगळ्या गोष्टीचा प्रथम इतिहास थोडासा सांगितला पाहिजे म्हणजे हा प्रश्नाचा, आणि थोडस मागे जायला पाहिजे, कारण त्याशिवाय लोकांच्या लक्षात येणार नाही. कारण विशेषतः अलीकडल्या पिढीला नकाशावर दाखवायची पाळी येते की बाबा हा पॅलेस्टाईन आहे वगैरे. माणसं इतकी आपापल्या स्वतःच्या विहिरीमध्ये अडकलेली येतात दुर्दैवाने. तर थोडासा इतिहास सांगावा लागतो की पॅलेस्टाईन हा जुना प्रदेश, काही हजार वर्ष, बरोबर. आणि जवळपास 1882च्या आधीपर्यंत या पॅलेस्टाईनमध्ये एक आजचा जो पॅलेस्टाईन इथे असं म्हणून की 5-1 लाख अरब राहत होते, 5-5.5 लाख. एक 5-1 हजार साधारणपणे ज्यू होते, 2-1 हजार ख्रिश्चन होते. असा एकत्रित समाज होता. आणि त्या काळी ऑटोमन साम्राज्य व्हायचं, त्या काळामध्ये देश अशी गोष्ट नव्हती. आणि अशी तिन्ही प्रकारची माणसं, 3 वेगळ्या धर्माची तिथं राहत होती. ह्याला पहिला टर्न मिळाला तो 1882च्या सुमाराला मिळाला. ज्यू ही जी मंडळी आहे ही जगभर पसरली. त्यांच्यावर अन्याय अत्याचार झाला कारणाने. कोणी स्पेन खाली युरोपमध्ये गेले, काही लोक वर ईस्टर्न युरोपमध्ये रशियाच्या बाजूला वगैरे गेले. हे जे ईस्टर्न युरोपमध्ये रशियाच्या बाजूला असलेले लोक होते त्यांच्यावर तिकडल्या स्थानिक लोकांनी अत्याचार केला. कारण तुम्हाला माहिती आहे की ख्रिश्चियानिटीमध्ये ते ज्यूना राक्षस मानतात. त्यांच्यामध्ये एक अशी समजूत आहे की ज्यू लोक त्यांच्या कुठल्या तरी एका सणामध्ये ख्रिश्चन मुलांचं रक्त पितात, असं एक त्यांच्यामध्ये आहे. हा, आणि त्यामुळे कायम तुम्ही लक्षात घ्याल की ख्रिश्चनांमध्ये, कॅथलिक्समध्ये ते खूप प्रचंड अँटी ज्यू असतात. आता खरं असायचं काही कारण नाही, कारण ख्रिस्त स्वतः ज्यू होता. आणि नंतर ख्रिस्ती धर्म झाला, पण त्यांच्यावर अन्याय अत्याचार होत गेले. खूप ऐतिहासिक कारण आहेत, तुम्हाला ती अनेक नाटकांमधून, कादंबऱ्यांमधून सापडतात. 1882 साली ज्यावेळी ईस्टमध्ये त्यांच्यावर अन्याय सुरू झाला त्यावेळी तिथून ते सटकले. आणि मग कुठे आपल्याला राहता येईल असा विचार करता करता त्यांच्यापैकी काही लोकांना वाटलं की आपण पॅलेस्टिनमध्ये यावं. आणि मग सुमारे 1500 ते 2000 लोक पॅलेस्टिनमध्ये आले आणि तिथे त्यांनी कॉलनी केली. आता त्यावेळी आलेल्या लोकांनी लिहून ठेवलंय की त्यांना त्या काळामध्ये जे ज्यू दिसले त्यांना असं वाटलं की हे ही जी अरब माणसं आहे ती माणसंच नाहीयेत. एका माणसाने लिहून ठेवलंय की पॅलेस्टीन रिकामा होता. आता रिकामा म्हणजे काय होता की ती सगळी जी माणसं शिकलेली होती, विशेषतः ख्रिश्चन माणसं होती, ती नॉन ख्रिस्ती लोकांना कायम कमी प्रतीचं मानतात. जसं भारतात ज्यावेळी आले ब्रिटिश लोक त्यावेळी भारतीय लोक जंगली आहेत आणि त्यांना आपण बदललं पाहिजे असं एक उपकार केल्यागत येतात. तसेच ते तिकडले ज्यू आले आणि म्हणाले कोण आहे ती माणसं, काय धर्म आपल्याला माहिती नाही, असं असं करत तिथे आले आणि तिथे त्यांनी वसायला सुरुवात केली. पण हे वसताना त्यांचा पहिल्या दिवसापासून दृष्टिकोन हा दादागिरीचा होता. म्हणजे स्थानिक ज्यू एकीकडे होते, स्थानिक अरब होते आणि यांच्या आपसामध्ये कुठले जसे समाज असतात तसे चांगले संबंध होते, एकत्र राहत होते, शेजारी होते, एकाच्या शेतावर दुसरं काम करत होता वगैरे वगैरे. ही जी बाहेरची मंडळी आली त्यांना पॅलेस्टाईन आपला करून घ्यायचा होता आणि म्हणून त्यांनी पहिल्या प्रथम तिथे दादागिरीला सुरुवात केली. जमिनी विकत घेणं, अरब माणसाची जमीन घ्यायची, तो नाही म्हणा त्याला हाकलून द्यायचं, असं करत 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 त्यांनी दादागिरीत आपल्या कॉलन्या वाढवायला सुरुवात केली. पॅलेस्टाईन मध्ये इस्रायलच्या निर्मितीची कहाणी अशी आहे. पहिल्या दिवसापासून आपण जिथे आलो तिथे स्थानिक माणसं राहतात, त्यांचा स्थानिक एक धर्म आहे. म्हणजे अरब आहेत आणि मुसलमान आहेत, सुनी आहेत, तर ती धर्म आहेत, त्यांची स्वतःची परंपरा आहे, हजारो वर्षे तिथे ते राहिलेले आहेत. तर शेवटी आपण इथे आलो म्हणजे ह्यांच्या बरोबर आपल्याला राहायचं आहे असा विचार त्यांनी काही केला नाही आणि दादागिरीला सुरुवात केली. ही 1882. आणि तिथून नंतर जगभरचे जीव हलके 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 तिथे जे येत होते ते आल्यानंतर त्या सर्वांचा दृष्टिकोन असा होता की आपल्याला ही जमीन बळकावायची. ह्याच दृष्टीने ही माणसं इथे वसत राहिली. मग एक मोठा टप्पा येतो तो पहिलं महायुद्ध. पहिल्या महायुद्धाची आर्थिक परिस्थिती. ते एक लॉर्ड बेल्फोर नावाचा माणूस होता, त्याने रॉथशाइल्ड माणसाला सांगून टाकलं की तिथे तुम्हाला तुमचं इस्रायल करायला आमची हरकत नाही. आता ही माणसं कोण? हे लोक इंग्लंड मधले. हे जगाला काय सांगतात की तुम्ही इथे जाऊन पॅलेस्टीन मध्ये तुमचा देश निर्माण करा. आता तुम्ही तुमच्या देशात घ्या की त्याला, तिथे का तिथे का? आणि लक्षात घ्या त्या काळात सुद्धा 2 प्रकारे माणसं मिळत होती. एका कादंबरीकाराचा उल्लेख आहे की त्यांनी युगांडामध्ये का बसू नये असा सुद्धा प्रश्न विचारला होता. किंवा काही लोकांनी असाही विचार केला होता की आपण अधिक चांगली भूमी म्हणून अर्जेंटिनात का जाऊ नये. म्हणजे जर आपल्याला भूमी हवी असेल तर तिथेच का जायचं असा एक प्रश्न होता. तो हर्जल नावाच्या एका ब्रिटिश माणसाने सोडवला. त्याचं म्हणणं की झिऑन म्हणजे तो जो जेरुसलेमची टेकडी आहे त्या टेकडीवर आमच्या त्या सॉलोमनने बसवलेल्या वगैरे, तर तो आमचा भाग असं त्यांनी लिहिलं. आणि तिथून साधारणपणे 1896 नंतर त्यांच्या डोक्यात आलं की आम्ही मूळ तिथले तर आम्हाला तिथे जाऊ द्या. इथून इस्रायलच्या स्थापनेच्या विचाराला सुरुवात झाली. 1917 साली बेल्फोरने सांगितलं, मग 1967 साली आणि कोणीतरी सांगितलं, आणि नंतर ह्या सगळ्या काळामध्ये 1892 नंतर थेट 1947 पर्यंत, म्हणजे प्रत्यक्षात इस्रायल स्थापन होईपर्यंत जगभरचे लोक संघटितरित्या टोळ्या करून पॅलेस्टीनमध्ये आले आणि टोळ्या करून पॅलेस्टीनमध्ये लोकांना मारकूट करत, त्यांना त्यांच्या घरातून बाहेर काढत, त्यांना उद्ध्वस्त करत, अशा रीतीने त्यांनी 1948 साली इस्रायल देश स्थापन केलं. लोक हा प्रश्न अजून सुद्धा प्रश्न इकडे लक्ष देत नाहीत की तुम्ही एका दुसऱ्या जमिनीवर गेलात. उद्या माझ्या घरामध्ये कोणी पाहुणा आला तर त्याला माझ्याशी नको जुळवून घ्यायला. ते स्थानिक अरब माणसं आहेत जी पहिल्या सुरुवातीला किती पट होती, 5 लाख विरुद्ध 5,000 एवढं आहे, ते 100 पटीचा फरक होता. तेव्हा आपली माणसं जास्त वाढवत 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 हा सगळा उद्योग केला. पहिला प्रश्न जन्मापासून तिथे निर्माण होतो तो हाच होतो की तुम्ही दुसऱ्याच्या भूमीत गेल्यानंतर तुम्हाला तिथे अधिकार काय आणि त्या लोकांबरोबर तुम्ही कसं वागणार. आता पहिल्या दिवसापासून असं आहे की ब्रिटनमध्ये होते, एका परीने श्रीमंत माणसं होती. आता हे खरं आहे की दुसऱ्या महायुद्धामध्ये ज्यावेळी होलोकॉस्ट झालं आणि जीवांना मारण्यात आलं, 60 लाख जीवांचं हत्याकांड झालं, त्यामुळे सगळ्या जगभरच्या लोकांची जीवांना सहानुभूती होती की त्यांचं काहीतरी केलं पाहिजे. पण त्यांचं काहीतरी केलं पाहिजे म्हणजे त्यांना देश दिला पाहिजे, देश कुठे दिला पाहिजे याच्यावर जगभरच्या लोकांनी काही विचार केला नाही. विचार करायला त्यांना वेळ पण नव्हता. आणि त्यांनी मग अमेरिका, ब्रिटन, फ्रान्स ही जी जिंकलेले देश होते, त्या जिंकलेल्या देशातल्या लोकांनी, त्यांच्याकडे भरपूर पैसे होते, ते जेते होते, आणि त्यामुळे त्या लोकांनी यांना हाताशी धरून तिथे इस्रायलला देश स्थापन केला. सुरुवातीच्या काळामध्ये तुम्ही डॉक्युमेंट्स पहा तर तुमच्या लक्षात येईल की माणसाला आणि फोटो आहेत भरपूर अवेलेबल, की माणसाला घराच्या बाहेर काढायचं, त्याच्या गळ्यामध्ये एक मडकं द्यायचं, त्याच्या हातात थोडी शिदोरी द्यायची आणि सांगायचं चालत चूक, इथून निघून जा तू, आणि वाटेल तिथे निघून जा, इथे तुला परत यायचं नाही. हे 1948 साली घडलं. म्हणजे आणि गंमत बघा, आता त्याचे तुम्ही वाचलत ना, आता ओरियाना फलाचीनी हिची मुलाखत घेतलेली होती गोल्डा मेयरची. त्याच्यामध्ये गोल्डा मेयर मांडतात काय, इस्रायलची आमची भूमिका काय आहे की जॉर्डन पासून, म्हणजे जॉर्डन रिव्हर पासून भूमध्य सागरापर्यंत, म्हणजे अख्खा पॅलेस्टाईन हा आम्हाला आमचा जीवनचा करायचा आहे. गोल्डा मेयर तर तिथे पॅलेस्टिनी लोक होते, मानायला सुद्धा तयार नाहीत. मग फार तर फार काय त्या म्हणतात की नाही ठीक आहे, ते असतील, त्यांनी आमच्याशी जुळवून घ्यायचं आणि कसं जुळवून घ्यावं आम्ही ठरवतो. म्हणजे हा जो आरोप पॅलेस्टिनी लोकांवर होतो की त्यांनी इस्रायलला मान्यता दिली नाही, मुळामध्ये पॅलेस्टिनी लोकांना मान्यता न देऊनच इस्रायलची निर्मिती झालेली आहे. भूमध्य सागरापासून जॉर्डन रिव्हर पर्यंत सगळा पॅलेस्टिनचा पट्टा आहे हा आम्हीच आहोत, आणि तुम्ही पॅलेस्टिनी लोक आहात, तुम्हाला इथे राहायची आवश्यकता नाही, शेजारी तुमचा देश आहे. म्हणजे तुमच्या वंशाचे लोक जॉर्डन मध्ये आहेत तर जॉर्डन मध्ये जा तुम्ही. म्हणजे उदाहरणार्थ भारतातल्या माणसाला कोणाला हाकलून द्यायचं असेल त्याला काय म्हणायचं, तुझा नेपाळमध्ये, तुझा आणखी कुठल्या तरी देशामध्ये, हा संबंध नाही, आम्ही इथली माणसं आहोत, आम्ही लोकल आहोत. तर हा साधा प्रश्न लक्षात न घेता पहिल्या दिवसापासून इस्रायल ही दादागिरी करत सुटली. आता जेव्हा 67 साली युद्ध झालं, आता मोठा इतिहास आहे की मग पॅलेस्टिनी लोक एकत्र आले, PLA झाले, अराफत आले, आणि ज्यावेळी हिंसा सुरू झाली त्यावेळी सगळं जग मध्ये पडलं. 48 पूर्वीपर्यंत ज्या रीतीने पॅलेस्टिनी लोकांना हाकलून देऊन पॅलेस्टिनची स्थापना झाली, तोपर्यंत जगाने तिकडे कधी लक्ष दिलं नाही. जेव्हा पॅलेस्टिनमध्ये लोक संघटित झाले आणि म्हणायला लागले की आमचं काय, आमच्या घरावरून तुम्हाला हाकलून देता, आमचे अधिकार काय, तेव्हा जग जागं झालं, तेव्हा युनायटेड नेशन जागे झाले आणि म्हणायला लागले की नाही बाबा, यांच्याशी तुम्हाला आता जुळवून घ्यायला पाहिजे. आणि तिथून मग जगामध्ये असा विचार सुरू झाला की ह्या भूमीमध्ये 2 देश तयार करा, एक पॅलेस्टिनी लोकांना त्यांचा देश द्या आणि एक ज्यू लोकांना त्यांचा देश द्या, अशा 2 स्टेट 2 नेशन्स असा सिद्धांत सुरू झाला. मग जगभरचे लोक काय म्हणतात त्याला, पॅलेस्टिनला सहानुभूती होती, बोलत होते. मग एकदा ऑस्लो करार झाला, मग आणखी काहीतरी करार झाला. पण प्रत्येक वेळी तुमच्या लक्षात येईल की 1948 पासून आजपर्यंत इस्रायल प्रत्येक टप्प्यावर आपल्याकडलं शस्त्र सामर्थ्य वापरून प्रत्येक वेळी 5 ते 10% पॅलेस्टिनी लोकांना हाकलून देऊन बेघर करत करत स्वतःच सो कॉल्ड इस्रायल हे मोठं करत करत राहिले. आणि ही अवस्था आजपर्यंत शिल्लक आहे. म्हणजे त्यावेळी 55-45% अशी जी एक विभागणी होती, आज लिटरली अशी अवस्था आहे की आज फक्त 15% जमिनीवर आज पॅलेस्टिनी लोक उरलेले आहेत. आणि अवस्था अशी आहे की गाझा पट्टी सोडली तर जे वेस्ट बँकमध्ये ज्या पॅलेस्टिनी वस्त्या आहेत या सुद्धा चारही बाजूनी ज्यूंनी वेढलेल्या आहेत. मी तिथे गेलो होतो त्यावेळेस मला पाहायला दिसलं आणि इतकं भीषण दृश्य असतं की पॅलेस्टिनी लोकांची वस्ती असते, गाव असतं आपल्यासारखंच गाव असतं, 1000-2000 लोकांची वस्ती, त्याच्यामध्ये भिंत उभारायची, मग त्या भिंतीवर वॉच टॉवर उभारायचे आणि मग यांच्या लष्करी उभं करायचे आणि मग तिथे आपले लोक राहायचे, लोकांना हाकलून. असं एक एक वस्ती ताब्यात घेत त्यांना हाकलून देणं आजपर्यंत चालू आहे. म्हणजे 2017 साली सुद्धा जवळपास आज अशी अवस्था आहे की इस्रायलच्या ऑफिशियल लोकसंख्येच्या 10% लोकसंख्या एवढी आज सेटलर्स म्हणून जवळपास 237 वस्त्या त्यांनी तयार केल्या आहेत. वस्त्या म्हणजे गाव आहेत आणि तिथे जाऊन घुसतात, आसपासच्या परिसरातून लोकांना हाकलून देतात आणि हाकलून देतात म्हणजे लिटरली सांगतात की तुम्ही हवे तिथे निघून जा. आता परवा जे 11 दिवसाचं युद्ध झालं त्यात जे प्रकरण झालं, ईस्ट जेरुसलेम मधल्या लोकांना सांगितलं की तुम्ही इथून उठून जा. आता ते लोक म्हणाले की अरे आम्ही इथे राहतो, आमचे आजोबा पणजोबापासून आम्ही इथे राहत होतो, आम्हाला ते माहिती नाही, तुम्ही निघून जा. आता पणजोबापासूनच्या घराचे कागदपत्र कोणाकडे असतील मला तुम्ही सांगा बरं. आज आपल्याकडे सुद्धा असतात का कोणाकडे? बरं हा काळ असा आहे की 1948 साली कोणाकडे रेकॉर्ड सुद्धा नव्हते. आज तुम्ही बघाल की आज सुद्धा तुम्ही लोकांच्या घरी गेलात ना तर कोविड तर म्हणतात तुम्ही जन्मले केव्हा, तर पंढरपूरच्या वारीच्या वेळी 8 दिवस आधी वगैरे असं लोक सांगायची पद्धत आहे. आता कोण तुम्हाला सांगणार हो 150 वर्षापूर्वी माझं घर कुठे होतं? असं करून त्यांना बाहेर काढतायत. त्यांच्या दाराच्या बाहेर आता पोलीस उभे आहेत बंदुकी घेऊन आणि त्यांना हाकलून देण्याची तयारीत आहेत. त्यांनी तिथं दंगा केला म्हणून ही सगळी गडबड सुरू झाली. त्यामुळे तुम्हाला बघा तुम्ही असं की इस्रायलचा सगळा देश दुर्दैवाने तेव्हा ज्या क्षणी इस्रायल तिथे वसलं आणि हाकलून दिलं त्यावेळी पॅलेस्टिनी लोक म्हणाले आमच्या अधिकाराचं काय, आम्ही कुठे जायचं, आम्ही इथले राहणारे लोक आहोत ना, किती हजार वर्ष आम्ही इथे आहोत. तेव्हा प्रश्न झाला, त्यांनी दंगा केला, त्याच्यानंतर लोक त्यांच्या विरोधात गेले आणि नंतर आता त्यांना रिकॉग्नाइज करायला तयार आहेत. तर लोक काय म्हणतात, पॅलेस्टीन असं म्हणाले की आम्ही इस्रायलला रिकॉग्नाइज करत नाही. कसं रिकॉग्नाइज कराल? तुम्ही माझ्या घरी पाहुणे म्हणून आलात आणि म्हणाला आता हे घर माझं, आता मी कसं तुम्हाला रिकॉग्नाइज करू मला सांगा तुम्ही. तरी सुद्धा एका क्षणी हे सगळं जगभरचं प्रेशर आल्यानंतर ते म्हणाले की ठीक आहे, आम्ही तुम्हाला रिकॉग्नाइज करतो. पहिला अनेक दिवस करत नव्हते. इस्रायलचं म्हणणं काय की ते आमच्यावर हल्ला करतात म्हणजे तुम्ही त्यांच्या घरात बसल्यावर ते जातील कुठे? पण पीएलओ अराफतच्या लोकांनी नंतर मान्य केलं की ठीक आहे ओके आम्ही मान्य करतो, पण चला आता ही परिस्थिती आम्ही स्वीकारतो आणि आता आपण 2 देश करूया. आणि हे 2 देश करायला आज सुद्धा जगातल्या ह्या सगळ्या महासत्ता अमेरिका वगैरे सगळे लोक मान्यता देत नाही. आणि गंमत बघा किती की आता ओबामा सुद्धा असतानाच्या काळामध्ये किती $38 बिलियन लष्करी त्याची मदत अमेरिका, $38 बिलियन एकेका देशाच्या जीडीपी एवढा सगळा पैसा तिथे होतं. त्यामुळे ह्यांच्याकडे एवढी जबरदस्त पैसा आणि दुसऱ्या बाजूला यांची अवस्था काय, आणि त्यामुळे ज्यावेळी त्यांना मारलं जातं पॅलेस्टिनी लोक त्यावेळी ना आसुरी आनंद वाटतो. म्हणजे ह्यांच्याकडे न्यूक्लिअर आर्म्स आहेत आणि ते तिकडे बिचारे साध्या बंदुका घेऊन लढत असतात. ते रॉकेट टाकतात ती सुद्धा वाटेल तिकडे जातात कारण त्यांच्याकडे प्रिसिजन यंत्रणाही नाही. तेव्हा अशा रीतीने एका परीने एक सामान्य साधा माणूस विरुद्ध एक बलदंड माणूस अशी लढाई 1947 सालापासून यांनी निर्माण केली आणि ती आतापर्यंत घडत आलेली आहे. आता यांची अवस्था वाईट आहे पॅलेस्टिनी लोकांची. शिक्षण नाही, म्हणजे तुम्ही जर कम्पेअर केलं ना तर गाझा मधल्या लोकांचं उत्पन्न जीडीपी पर पर्सन जीडीपी वगैरे जेमतेम $1700 वगैरे आहे आणि तिकडे त्यांचं किती आहे $37,000. म्हणजे ही श्रीमंत माणसं यांच्याकडे शस्त्र यांना अमेरिका अब्जावधी डॉलर देत असते, यांच्याकडे कोणी बघत नाही. यांचे जे अरब मित्र आहेत हे सुद्धा यांना दगा देतात कारण त्यांना शेवटी अमेरिकेशी जुळून घ्यायचं असतं. हा दुर्दैव भाग आहे. तर अशी एकूण ही परिस्थिती आहे की जगामध्ये दुर्दैवाने एकटा पडलेला भाग आहे. यांचे जे अरब किंवा मुसलमान मित्र आहेत ते सुद्धा यांना मदत करत नाही. ते सुद्धा यांना लेबेनॉनमधून हाकलून देतात. ते सुद्धा जॉर्डनमध्ये यांच्या ज्या वस्त्या आहेत त्या वस्त्यांमध्ये आज 4 पिढ्या बस्तीच्या अशा आहेत की ज्यांना अजून मानवी अधिकार दिलेले नाहीत. ते उपऱ्यासारखे जॉर्डनमध्ये राहतात आज. असे सर्व ठिकाणी पसरलेले आहेत. तर एका परीने एक इतिहासात पाहिल्यानंतर तुमच्या लक्षात येईल की पहिल्यापासून या लोकांना ढकललं, मारलं, अतिशय वाईट अवस्था आहे. आता त्यांची आपसात मारामारी आहे, राजकारण आहे, हा राजकारणाचा भाग आपण या घडीला सोडून देऊ. पण मुळामध्ये एका एका आपण असं म्हणू की असहाय्य असा समाजाला बळाच्या जोरावर त्यांच्या घरातून हाकलून दिलं. ते 1947 पासून, मे बी 1892 पासून आजपर्यंत सातत्याने चालू आहे. आणि हाकलून देणाऱ्या इस्रायलच्या पायी, मी नेहमी माझ्या लिखाणात म्हणतो की हे दादागिरी करतात, हे गुंड आहेत. आता मी माझ्या लिखाणात लिहिलं की ह्या लोकांना राग येतो. मध्यंतरी मला इस्रायलच्या दूतावासातले काही लोक वगैरे भेटले, ते त्याची आ करून बघत होते, कारण मी त्यांचं वर्णन गुंड म्हणून करतो. गुंडगिरी आहे, शुद्ध गुंडगिरी आहे. आणि असंख्य वेळा युनायटेड नेशन्सने यांच्या विरुद्ध ठराव करून यांना सांगितलं तुम्ही सुधारा. हे धुडकावून लावतात. आणि धुडकावून लावतात याचं कारण अमेरिका, ब्रिटन, फ्रान्स इत्यादी देश त्यांच्या पाठी उभे आहेत. आणि म्हणून ही सगळी मारामारी चालू आहे. आता तुम्ही तो दुसरं मला जे विचारलं तो भाग असा होता की भारताची भूमिका काय. भारताची भूमिका पहिल्यापासून पॅलेस्टीनच्या बाजूने आहे. पहिल्यापासून की पॅलेस्टीनवर अन्याय होतोय आणि पॅलेस्टीनवरचा हा अन्याय आपण दूर केला पाहिजे. पण भारताच्या भूमिकेबद्दल माझं म्हणणं असं आहे की भारताची स्वतःची ताकद काय. म्हणजे मी उद्या जर भूमिका घेतली की मला हे बीजेपीचं सरकार नकोय, माझी ताकद काय. भारताची जी भूमिका आहे ही एक सहानुभूतीची भूमिका आहे. म्हणजे आपण जे आपण नॉन अलाइन्ड मध्ये होतो, नेहरूंनी हा सगळा पुढाकार घेतला आणि नेहरू त्यांच्या पाठी उभे राहिले. परंतु उद्या इस्रायलला धडा शिकवायची पाळी आली किंवा इस्रायलच्या दादागिरीच्या विरोधामध्ये जर पॅलेस्टीनला उभा करायची वेळ आली तर त्याच्यामध्ये सैनिक, पैसा, माणसं ओतण्याची ताकद भारताची आहे का. त्यामुळे भारताचा पाठिंबा नेहमी फिलॉसॉफिकल लेवलवर राहतो, तत्वज्ञान पाठिंबा राहतो. आणि दुर्दैवाने काय झालेलं आहे की भारताचा पाठिंबा फक्त तत्वज्ञान या पातळीवरच राहिला. 2014 नंतर काय, आता या मधल्या काळामध्ये तुम्हाला भारतीय माणसाची भूमिका म्हणून सांगतो. भारतामध्ये गंमत अशी की भारत हा 90% हिंदूंचा देश आहे. या 90% हिंदूंमध्ये जवळपास बाबरी पडेपर्यंतच्या अवस्थेमध्ये हिंदूंमध्ये हे हिंदुत्ववादाचा प्रभाव कमी होता, छुपा होता पण कमी होता. हिंदू माणसाच्या मनामध्ये मुसलमानांच्या बद्दल एक थोडासा आकस असतो, दुरावा असतो. आणि त्यामुळे पॅलेस्टीन बद्दल ते मुसलमान म्हणून दुरावा काही प्रमाणात होता, फार नव्हता पण होता. परंतु कायम इस्रायल हा कसा पॅलेस्टीन मधल्या मुसलमानांना ठोकून काढतो याच्या सुरस कथा भारतामध्ये लोकांना सांगितल्या जातात, खोट्या कथा. दुसऱ्या बाजूने मी ज्यावेळी फिरून आलो आणि लोकांना भेटून सांगत होतो, म्हटलं तुम्ही जाऊन पाहिलं का पॅलेस्टीन मध्ये. तुम्ही पॅलेस्टीनमध्ये जाऊन पहा, तुम्ही बिहारमध्ये जाऊन पहा आणि सामान्य गरीब माणसाची काय अवस्था असते हे तुम्ही बघा, म्हणजे तुम्हाला कळेल. तर ही सगळी जी भारतातले लोक दुरून राहून त्यांना मजा वाटते अजून सुद्धा भेटले की ते असे आ वासून इस्रायलकडे बघत राहतात, त्यांना इस्रायलमध्ये देव वाटतो. अरे ज्या अतिशय अमानुष पद्धतीने त्यांना वागवतात तर त्याबद्दल लोकांच्या मनामध्ये काय म्हणूया त्याला, जूम बद्दल थोडासा आपलेपणा किंवा बरं आहे कसे ठोकून काढतात वगैरे असं होतं. परंतु हे एका परीने मर्यादित होतं. जोपर्यंत हिंदुत्वाचा प्रभाव नव्हता, जोपर्यंत उदाहरण नव्हतं आलं त्याला. आता 2014 नंतर काय झालंय, खाजगीमध्ये बोलताना लोक म्हणतात अरे वा कसं आहे, बरं आहे, तुम्ही जाऊन पाहता का तिथे. तुम्हाला तुमच्या घरातून काढल्यानंतर तुम्हाला काय वाटेल सांगा. या प्रश्नाला उत्तर नाही, कारण अलीकडच्या काळामध्ये सगळा प्रचार व्हॉट्सअप युनिव्हर्सिटीतून होतो आणि खोट्या 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 सगळ्या गोष्टी सांगितल्या जातात. त्यामुळे म्हणजे यांनी त्यांचं एक घर उद्ध्वस्त केलं की बघा इस्रायल स्वतःच्या संरक्षणासाठी उभा आहे, राईट. मग त्या संरक्षणाचा अधिकार गाझातल्या लोकांना नाही का. आज सुद्धा सगळे तुम्ही करार बघा की गाझामध्ये किंवा वेस्ट बँकेमध्ये जी माणसं आहेत त्यांना संरक्षणाचा अधिकार नाहीये. आज टेक्निकली अशी अवस्था आहे की त्यांना स्वतःचं सैन्य बाळगायचा अधिकार नाही, स्वतःचे पोलीस. आणि त्यांनी त्यांचं परराष्ट्र धोरण कसं ठेवावं, काय ठेवावं हे पूर्णपणे इस्रायल ठरवतं. गाझामध्ये कुठला माल जाईल कुठला नाही इस्रायल ठरवतं. गाझामध्ये इंजेक्शन जायची असतील कोविडची तर कोण, इस्रायल ठरवतं. वेस्ट बँक मधल्या गावामधल्या लोकांनी कसं करावं हे चारही बाजूने इस्रायलच्या सैन्याने ठरवलेलं आहे. मला सांगा काय हे, मला तर असं लक्षात येतं की किती ऍब्सर्ड आहे सगळे. आता अशा ऍब्सर्डिटीमध्ये आता भारतातल्या लोकांना दुर्दैवाने आपल्या इथे मीडियामध्ये माध्यमांबद्दल माझी नेहमी तक्रार असते की माध्यम लोकांना नीटपणे समजून देत नाहीत आणि जागतिक प्रश्न तर कधीच समजावून देत नाही, त्यांना काही माहितीच नसतं. मध्यंतरी एका समारंभामध्ये गेलो होतो आणि तिथे एक पत्रकार बाई आल्या आणि त्या बोलायला लागल्या आणि त्या म्हणाल्या मला पॅलेस्टाईन कुठेही दाखवावं. एका मराठी पेपर मधल्या काम करणाऱ्या बाई होत्या त्या. आता ही अशी अवस्था आहे. त्यामुळे भारताचं जे जे धोरण आहे टेक्निकली, आज तुम्ही विचारलात तर भारताला त्या टेक्निकल धोरणाच्या विरोधात जाता येत नाही. कारण भारताने आपण असं स्वीकारलेलं आहे की आपलं पॅलेस्टाईनला पाठिंबा आहे. पण भारतातली जी म्हणजे आज जे आपण म्हणू की भाजप संघवाले वगैरे लोक, यांचा आतून पाठिंबा हा इस्रायलला पहिल्यापासून आहे आणि त्यानं तर देवच मानतात. म्हणजे इस्रायलचा माणूस आला की ते असे डोळे विस्तारून त्यांच्याकडे बघत असतात. हे आजचं वास्तव आहे. ह्याचं कारण मला असं वाटतं की भारतातल्या लोकांना या परिस्थितीची नेमकी जाणीव नाही. इस्लामिक समाजामध्ये स्वतंत्र प्रॉब्लेम आहे. पॅलेस्टीनमध्ये सुद्धा अनेक पक्ष आहेत, त्यांच्या आपसात मारामाऱ्या असतात कुठेही असतात त्या. पण त्या त्यांच्या आपसामध्ये मारामाऱ्या आहेत, मतभेद आहेत, ते कमी शिकलेले आहेत, ते ऍडव्हान्स नाही आहेत. याचा अर्थ तुम्ही त्यांना मारणार का? मला हे कळत नाही कधी. शेवटी एक ह्युमन बिंग, एक मानवी अधिकार नावाची गोष्ट असते की नाही कोणाला. तर हे दुर्दैवाने भारतातल्या माध्यमातून ज्या परीने लोकांच्या समोर यायला पाहिजे ते दुर्दैवाने येत नाही. मला असं वाटतं आमच्यासारखी माणसं जर कमी पडतात, आम्ही हे सगळं समजावून देतो, तेव्हा मला असं वाटतं अशी परिस्थिती आहे. त्यामुळे भारतातल्या माल जर तुम्ही विचारलं तर भारतातल्या माणसाला याच्याबद्दल माहितीच कमी आहे. म्हणजे मी नेहमी जगभर फिरून येतो आणि ज्यावेळी लिहितो तेव्हा लोक विचारतात त्याला माहितीच नसतं काय. आता अफगाणिस्तान उदाहरणार्थ आहे, असंच प्रश्न आहे. त्या अफगाण लोकांच्या बिचारांचे एवढे सगळे प्रॉब्लेम्स आहेत, परंतु भारतातल्या लोकांना अफगाणिस्तानचं स्ट्रक्चर माहिती नाही. हा, त्यामुळे लोक असं वागत असतात. तर मला असं वाटतं की अं, अं, पॅलेस्टीनचा प्रश्न हा फार किचकट प्रश्न आहे आणि त्यांच्यावर वारंवार 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 अन्याय होत आलेला आहे. अन्यायाचे थर आहेत एकावर एक असे रचलेले. त्याच्या मुळामध्ये जाणं हा फार प्रॉब्लेमॅटिक आहे. जगभरात सुद्धा असं आहे की जगभरातली बलवान माणसं, बलवान देश म्हणजे युरोपमधले देश आणि अमेरिका हे ज्यूंच्या पाठी उभे आहेत आणि त्यामुळे ज्यूनी काही केलं तरी त्यांना ते पाठिंबा देतात. ज्यूने समजावून सांगितलं की तुम्ही, मी इस्रायलमध्ये फिरलो, मी जेरुसलेममध्ये तेल अविवला गेलो, मी लोकांशी बोललो, मी तुम्हाला सांगतो अनेक ज्यूंशी बोललो आणि त्यांना अन्याय पसंत नाही. पण ते असं म्हणतात की आमचे नेते नालायक आहेत. ते म्हणतात आमचे नेते नालायक आहेत, त्यांना राजकारण करण्यासाठी हे उद्योग करायचे आहे. आणि जगामध्ये गेल्या 10-15 वर्षामध्ये हा एक नवीन फिनॉमेना तयार झालेला आहे. मूळ प्रश्नाकडे दुर्लक्ष करून स्वतःच्या राजकारणासाठी परिस्थितीचा वापर करायचा. हे इस्रायलमध्ये वारंवार होत आलेलं आहे आणि नेत्याने ते आतापर्यंत करत आले. तर मला असं वाटतं की भारतातल्या लोकांना तिकडलं राजकारण कळलं पाहिजे, तिकडली माणसं काय ती कळली पाहिजे. पॅलेस्टीन मधले, वेस्ट बँक मधले किंवा गाझा मधली माणसं काय, त्यांचे प्रॉब्लेम्स काय, ते माणसं आहेत तुमच्या आमच्यासारखी, असं नाही करून चालत. परवाच्या 11 दिवसाच्या त्या युद्धानंतर बोंब काय झाली. पहिल्या प्रथम इस्रायलमध्ये तेल अविवच्या जवळ एक रॉकेट पडलं आणि घर उद्ध्वस्त झालं पहिल्या प्रथम. तेव्हा त्यांच्या लक्षात आलं की आपल्या घराची काय अवस्था होती ती. हे गेले जवळपास 47 पासून 50 वर्षे तुम्ही त्यांची घरं उद्ध्वस्त केलं, त्यांनी कुठे बघायचं. आज ते असं म्हणाले आमची सिक्युरिटी आहे का. कारण त्यांच्या लक्षात आलं की आता हे कदाचित जास्त हिंसक होतील, हिंसेने प्रश्न सुटणार नाही. कितीही बळ वापरलं तरी सुद्धा इस्रायलचा विजय होणं शक्य नाही, पॅलेस्टीनचा पराभव होणं शक्य नाही. तेव्हा शेवटी आहे परिस्थिती मांडून दोघांना एकत्र बसून, दोन्हीकडच्या लोकांना एकत्र बसून शांततेत हे जग उभारणं अत्यावश्यक आहे. दुर्दैवाने मला तुम्ही विचारलं तर माझं आता टोकाला येऊन मी धोरणाच्या बाबतीत म्हणतो, दुर्दैवाने असं आहे की हे करण्यासाठी लागणारं पॉलिटिकल विल आणि पॉवर, मसल पॉवर, रिसोर्स पॉवर, ही रिसोर्स पॉवर दुर्दैवाने पॅलेस्टीनच्या पूर्णपणे विरोधात आहे. सगळे पैसे, माणसं, शस्त्र, माती, मसण आणि झालेला प्रचार लोकांच्या बद्दलचा, म्हणजे ज्यू माणसं, इस्रायली माणसं देव आणि पॅलेस्टाईन आणि मुसलमान माणूस वाईट आहे, एवढं जगामध्ये आता पसरवलं गेलेलं आहे की त्यामुळे त्यांच्या बाजूला कोणी उभं राहत नाही. ही अशी परिस्थिती आहे. वातावरण बदलायला लागेल आणि कोणीतरी बळ गोळा करून. मला नेहमी आश्चर्य वाटतं की हे सुद्धा सुनी आहेत. आता सौदी सुद्धा सुनी आहे, कतारही सुनी आहे आणि तुम्ही तुम्ही तुमचाच देश आहे ना. आणि तुम्ही एवढ्या मारामारी करतात, येमेनमध्ये मारामारी करता, तुम्ही ठकास ठक म्हणून तुम्ही उभे राहू शकला नाही पॅलेस्टीनच्या बाजूला. युद्ध करावं असं मला वाटत नाही, शस्त्र देऊन प्रश्न सुटणार नाही. परंतु ह्या लोकांनी काय या पॅलेस्टीनच्या लोकांवर राग आहे कुणाला माहिती. त्यांना शस्त्रविस्त्र कधी देत नाही, त्यांना बसा आणि तुम्ही मार खाऊ. दिस इज फेअर, दिस इज नॉट फेअर. हे पॉलिटिकली चुकीचं आहे. पण मला असं वाटतं की हा प्रश्न किचकट आहे, भयानक आहे, भीषण आहे. म्हणजे ज्या रीतीने माणसं मारली जातात पॅलेस्टीनमध्ये ते फार भयानक आहे. आणि हे लोकांना सांगितलं गेलं पाहिजे आणि याबद्दल जागृती झाली पाहिजे असं मला वाटतं. मला असं वाटतं मी पुरेसं बोललोय. ठीक आहे, काय असेल तर मला विचारा.
त्याचे प्रश्न येतीलच, म्हणजे
हम्म,
यायला पण लागलेले आहेत प्रश्न, सो ते
हम्म.
आपण
ठीक आहे.
घेऊच
ओके
म्हणजे.
ओके ओके.
सो या थँक्यू सो मच. आणि फार महत्वाचे मुद्दे, आणि तुम्ही बोलत होता तेव्हा इतके पॅरलल्स आपल्या देशामध्ये दिसत होते मला,
हम्म.
की उदाहरणार्थ वेन यू वर सेईंग, मी काही गोष्टी थोड्याशा इंग्लिश मधनं पण
Yeah,
बोलते,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
स्पीकर्सना सुद्धा ते हे होईल की basically, when Sir was talking about this whole issue of what is Palestinian issue, and what has been happening from 1947 or before that, and when he was talking about it, what came to my mind, and when he was talking about that right now today, when you see at Palestine, that only 50% of land is now left with Palestinian people, and
15, 1-5.
1-5, yeah, 15% of land is left with Palestinian people, which is a horrible fact that to know. And when I was thinking about it, and when you were, Sir was talking about that they are asked to, provide papers to show that they belong to this land and everything, it immediately reminded me of NRC and CAA, which has been happening in India, and where people in India are also were asked, has been pursued to, prove that they are citizens of India. And that is why I feel that we can identify with what kind of injustice and, a kind of terrorist attitude towards citizenship is being built over there. Then there are many other aspects that Sir talked about, is basically that what has been India's stand on this, and what he was basically sharing, that yes, we have taken a non-aligned kind of a stand towards Palestinian issue, and which basically came into existence from Nehru's era. But he was of an opinion that it has always remained as a philosophical understanding of, being with them, but not having enough power or military power or any other kind of power to really stand with Palestine in such a situation. And now, from there until now, when he was sharing, which has we all have seen it, and we have also seen it in BJP's, who is the ruling party right now, has seen that with what kind of an ideology BJP comes for, what is basically a fundamentalist ideology, Hindu nationalist ideology, where it has some kind of an acceptance in the many of the Hindu population in India, where there is a kind of a weird phenomena against Muslims, and there are these stories which have been populated among Hindus, or who are nationalist Hindus, where they are talked about that Israel is basically teaching a lesson to Arabs in Palestine. And these kinds of stories do not have any base, because the real question is that why are you not asking questions about why Israelis or Jews are there when Palestine's Arabs have been there for thousands of years, and why that happened, and why they have been thrown out of the land. Those questions are not brought forward, and those discussions have never happened. And now we see that the ruling party, BJP or RSS, they have always been been like what Sir was talking about. They look at Israeli as the god people. So that's an issue that we are dealing with in India in various different fronts, and their stand, uh, against Palestine or for Israel is very clear for us. Thank you very much, Damle sir. And taking forward, Arwa, who has joined with us directly from Palestine. Very, very warm welcome, Arwa. And I am going to, when we were talking to Arwa, we actually requested her, as she is from at Palestine, we are requesting her to talk about what is happening in Palestine right now, what they have gone through, because we have heard and seen horrific stories, and it is heart wrenching. So that's what we want to know. At the same time, we also talked about that we would also like to know what are the protests that are happening over there. What are the questions that people are taking up and how they are actually, protesting against it. And at the same time, we also want to know that this is an issue that this is a like a in Vijay's various speeches, he said that it's not a conflict, it's an apartheid. So in that apartheid situation is there, but at the same time, what are Palestinian citizens' questions towards their own government? So what are their questions that they're dealing with, and what are the questions that they want to ask to their own government? So how it is coming up from their side. So over to you, Arva.
Thank you so much for having me today. And before I start my intervention, I would like to extend my deepest condolences and sympathy to you and to the Indian people for the deaths and the hard time you are experiencing now because of
Arva, can you speak a little louder? Your voice is fading a bit. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So in my intervention today, can you hear me?
Yes, better. Yeah.
Okay. So I said in my intervention today, I will focus my talking about the current situation in Palestine and also how this situation has developed during the last month. And sorry if I repeat some issues that that my comrade before me talked about, because I don't understand Maharti, so I might repeat some things. So the first spark for the recent situation in Palestine actually started in Jerusalem as a direct result of two issues. The first issue is the repeated attacks by Israel against Al-Aqsa Mosque and its surroundings, and also on worshippers in relation with Al-Aqsa Mosque. And these attacks can be actually summarized in three major attacks. The first one is in the month of Ramadan, which is the month of fast for Muslims. The Israeli police set up barriers in Bab al-Amud, or Damascus Gate, which is a square near Al-Aqsa, where the people usually gather and talk and spend time, especially after breaking their fast in Ramadan. This square, it's really an essential outlet for people of Jerusalem. But Israel, in a provocative move, set up these barriers to prevent people from gathering. And these barriers actually lasted days until the people forced the Israeli forces to remove them again later. In the same period, also groups of settlers and Israeli armies sequentially stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and during this storming, the Israeli forces attacked the worshipper by throwing tear gas and by fired rubber bullets toward them. And in one of these stormings, the Israeli forces attacked the worshipper very brutally, and they wounded more than 300 of them. And these stormings actually were repeated many times and were carried out by hundreds of settlers. And this was happening in front of Israeli army and also by under their protection. And it's important to note that Al-Aqsa has a very important place for Palestinians, even for non-religious people. And these storming constitute a real provocation for Palestinians. And also this kind of storming generate kind of fear for the Palestinian that Israel can divide Al-Aqsa Mosque, as it did with another also important mosque for Palestinian in West Bank called Ibrahimi Mosque, or Masjid Ibrahimi. So the third thing that related to attacks against Al-Aqsa in Laylat al-Qadr, which is a night that comes at the end of the month of Ramadan, the Israeli it's very, very important night for religious people actually, and it has a very important holiness for people. And usually people celebrate this night in mosques, especially in Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israeli forces tried to prevent people from entering Al-Aqsa, and they didn't let them to get from the checkpoints. But the people of Jerusalem got down with their cars and stayed hours until they forced the Israeli forces to let the people to enter to Al-Aqsa. Another issue that has also escalated the situation in Palestine, that is Israel threatened 28 Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which is a neighborhood in Jerusalem, by expelling them from their homes and giving these homes to settlers. Actually, these families were displaced from their homes or from the Palestinian cities in Nakba in 1948. And the Jordanian government, which ruled the West Bank between the period between 1951 and 1967, with approval of UNRWA, granted these families lands in Sheikh Jarrah, and UNRWA provided money for the families to build the homes. And this was on the condition that these families drop their refugee rights or their refugee status. But Jordanian government promised these families they will take their rights, their ownership rights to these lands within 3 years. But after the war of 67, which actually today is the 54 anniversary of this war, Palestinian and families didn't get any paper. So in 1972, a group of settlers claimed the ownership of these lands. And since then, there has been an ongoing struggle by families to stay in their homes. In 2008 and in 2009, there are 3 families were evicted from their homes, and settlers come and move to live in these homes. This issue actually came back to the fore recently when the Israeli court sent an eviction order for to 12 families. And as a result to this threat, people from Sheikh Jarrah, as a form of protest, started to gather daily in the neighborhood, in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. And also Palestinians from other neighborhoods in Jerusalem joined them. But the Israeli police responded with extreme violence to this gathering and violently attacked the people in order to prevent them from gathering in Sheikh Jarrah. This actually generated a large protest movement that began in Jerusalem and later spread to almost all the cities inside Palestine 48, or what's so called now Israel. And people began to walk in marches toward Sheikh Jarrah, but again, Israeli police responded with excessive violence and throwing people with a huge number of gas bombs, and also shooting them with rubber bullets, and assaulted people and arrested many of them with very barbaric way. Also, Israel turned the neighborhood into a military barracks. They closed the entrance of the neighborhood from all sides and prevented Palestinians from enter the neighborhood, except the citizens, who's now are subject to a very strict inspection every time they enter or leave the neighborhood. Also, Israel prevented journalists from entering the neighborhood in order not to allowing them document what is happening there. Also, the residents of Sheikh Jarrah started to receive messages from settlers on their social media accounts, and also the settlers starting to write on the walls of homes of Palestinians, treating them with death and assault, and also to treating them of seizing their homes. All this actually were combined by criminal attacks by Israeli settlers, and these criminals were taking place in front of army, and as I said before, under their protection. And here I just want to recall one story of a Palestinian youth. His name is Ismail Tubasi, and he is 26 years old. He was killed by the Israeli settlers. They shoot him in his head, and after shooting him, they assaulted him with axes and knives. They assaulted his face and his body, and they mutilated him. And really, if you want to know the size of the crime that he was subjected to, you have to go and see his picture after the death. Actually, these attacks, whether against Al-Aqsa Mosque or against the residents of Sheikh Jarrah, angered the Palestinians and escalated a counter-resistance by the Palestinians in all places, in West Bank, in Jerusalem, and also in Gaza Strip. And these resistance actually took different forms. Inside the Palestine 48, or what's so-called Israel, people went out with daily marches. In West Bank, young men and women went to what Palestinians call contact or points of contacts or scene areas, and they confronted the soldiers by throwing stones against the soldiers. And in Gaza, the resistance factions fired rockets at the settlement that besieged Gaza almost from every direction. And as usually, all these forms of resistance were met with violent and brutal responses from Israel. And maybe the most obvious one, and I believe most of you watched it, the bombardment over Gaza, which lasted lasted actually 11 consecutive days. And during this bombardment, Israel launched more than 2,000 air raids. This actually resulted in a real massacre against Palestinians. You already talk about some numbers. Actually, the number rises because every day there is injured people who die after bombardment. I can give the most final number. At least 280 Palestinians were killed in this aggression, including 69 children and also 40 women. And more than 2,000 people were injured. More than 400 of them were children. And there was 9 families in Gaza have been wiped off the population civil registry. Not only one single member of these families is left alive after the bombardment. This also, in addition to the huge destruction of homes, schools, mosques, everything actually. Palestinians describe this aggression to be the most difficult of many aggressions that Israel launched against Gaza in recent years. Nothing spared from this aggression this time. Even the press houses were bombed. And I think you watched how Israel bombed the offices of Press Associated and also Al Jazeera office. They literally destroy everything. And in addition to this, Israel launched a massive campaign of arrests. And the campaign actually is still going on. The number of arrests that during the recent situation reached more than 2,000 arrests. About half of them is for Palestinians who hold Israeli identity. And some of these detainees were for wounded people, and Israel arrested them from inside the hospitals. And many of these detainees were severely beaten and abused during the process. Yeah, actually, it's true that the aggression against Gaza has stopped now, but the residents of Sheikh Jarrah and other neighborhoods in Jerusalem are still threatened with expulsion from their homes. And also the storming of Al-Aqsa continues almost at daily basis. And I don't know, this is a very brief description of what was happening in Palestine in the last month. And before I end my intervention, I just want to emphasize some points or a number of issues actually. The first one is what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah, not concern Sheikh Jarrah only, or as Israel tried to show for people that it's just an individual legal dispute over the ownership of houses. What's happening in Sheikh Jarrah actually is an example that summarizes Israeli policy of ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people. And today there are 5 neighborhoods in Jerusalem facing the same fate as Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem. Israel continues to destroy the buildings of Palestinians there and also preventing them from building there, and also provoking their IDs in order to expel them from Jerusalem. Actually, to understand what's happening and to understand this policy, we have to know that this policy has been going on since the establishment of Israel after Nakba. I mean, this policy has been going on since 73 years actually. And for audience who doesn't know what is a Nakba, it's actually a term that refers to the colonization of the Zionist colonization of Palestine, where the Zionist gangs carried out a real ethnic cleansing against Palestinians. They expelled more than 750,000 Palestinians, and they sent them to many countries, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and all over the world. And also during Nakba, these gangs carried out more than 50 massacres against Palestinians, and this resulted in killing more than 15,000 Palestinian people. Also, around 530 Palestinian villages and cities were wiped out. And what the rest of these villages actually subjected to the new occupying states, which Israel, which established on 14th of May in 1948. In Nakba, Israel seized about 80% of the land of Palestine. And just, it's very important to understand that what's happening and this aggressive policy of Israel is not related to incidents here or there, but it is a continuous and systematic process that affects all aspects of Palestinian life. Everything, it affects the economic situation of Palestinians, the social, the culture, everything, literally everything. And even during coronavirus, and while the Palestinian health sector was collapsing because of many cases were filling the hospitals, Israel prevented the vaccination to enter to Palestine. So when I said Israel policy affected all aspects of Palestine, I really mean it, all aspects of Palestine. Actually, the other thing that I want to emphasize on, that this crime against humanity that Israel is committing against Palestinians are taking place in a full view of all countries actually in the world, including those countries that vent about the human rights. And the policy of Israel not they watch the crime of Israel, but also supported it. This policy is supported by many Western countries led by United States. And I think all of you seen the United States, how the United States blocked 4 times a Security Council resolution to stop the brutal aggression against Gaza. And also maybe you hear the German foreign minister's statement saying that Israel has the right to defend itself in time where dozens of Palestinian children were being killed under Israeli bombardment. The foreign minister of Germany says that Israel has its right to defend itself. The other thing that I want to also to emphasize is that Israel always tried to suppress any Palestinian resistance, no matter how small or symbolic it is. And on media, Israel always tried to falsify the truth and show itself as a victim. And I think this explains why all these stories on Israeli media and also on the Western media started, or the news started the story from Hamas rocket, without talking about what was happening before, and actually without talking what has been happening since 73 years, not only just last month. Actually, the last point that I want to talk about, or also to emphasize, that all this oppression and all these crimes didn't make Palestinians to give up their struggle. In the contrary, the latest aggression of Israel generated kind of unprecedented revolutionary situation among Palestinians, and also generated a huge popular solidarity with Palestinian cause all over the world. And I think what are you doing now with this event, showing this kind of solidarity? And I want to renew my thanks for you and stress that this kind of activities are of great importance for us. They first raise the voice of truth to the people, and also they play a very major role in steadfastness of Palestinian people. So many thanks for you, and I'm sorry if I talked very too much.
No, not at all, Arwa. And I completely agree that it is absolutely important that we all speak and stand with Palestine. And I was choking when I was listening to you, and the amount of brutality that you just talked about, I don't know what to talk about that. But thank you very much for so bravely you have spoken right now, and feel so proud of you and all the other Palestinians who are standing with you. We all are together with you. And while listening to you, I was also thinking about, what Damle sir was talking about, that how US has supported with something around $35 million, like military that they are supporting with so much of money to actually infiltrate and support Israeli to attack Palestine. And he was also talking about how America, France, and Britain, being powerful countries, they are supporting this kind of a thing, and it makes so much of sense that at the international level, this kind of what should I say, terrorism, one has to really stand against it. So we are definitely there. I just want to add one more thing, to you, that when I was reading about this whole thing, there were articles which was written about what is happening in this time. In India, I guess, from the left parties, there was a demand to the government. I think only the left parties demanded that India should stop taking military or the military support or the armaments from Israel. And it is quoted that India is the second largest suppliers, and vice versa, like that. So it is that kind of a stand India has, left parties has pushed for India to take. Going forward, I would like to invite Vijay to take over the mic. And when we were talking to Vijay, we were basically Now, we know that Vijay has been talking about Palestine for the longest time right now, and in many places we have all heard him. And Vijay, we would like you to talk about, this whole international politics, geopolitics that comes into picture, and colonialism by the first world countries, where even Niru Damle Sarji also talked about it. US military funding to Israel, apartheid, and growing in India-Israel military ties, which even the left parties from India have been talking about, that we should end it, and why India should stand in solidarity with Palestine. So we are eager to hear you, Vijay. Please, over to you.
Firstly, thanks a lot for inviting me. Thanks to the Pune Collective for having this conversation. You have to read Arva, and I wrote an article which you can read at People's Dispatch. And I'd like people to read it because we try to lay out the conjuncture of this particular event. Yesterday, the General Secretary of the CPIM, Sitaram Yechuri, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister. I also would like people to read that. The reason the Communist Party's General Secretary wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, because India shamefully in the UN Human Rights Council abstained on a vote regarding Palestinian human rights. India shamefully abstained. And I think, as far as I know, the CPIM is the only party that has taken this up publicly and asked the Prime Minister why Indian ambassador in Geneva took this quite disappointing, very disappointing, and I'm going to repeat the word shameful stand. You wonder, looking at the Indian passport, what it has come to mean now. When once the Indian passport said travel to South Africa and Israel is not permitted, now, of course, India is abstaining in the halls of the United Nations. It's an extremely disappointing vote. And I think pressure must be put on the Indian government by the Indian people, not even pressure saying we stand with the Palestinians or anything, but pressure to stand with the UN Charter at the very minimum. India is basically walking all over the UN Charter. This is not a question of whether you stand with the Palestinians or you support Israel or whatever. By abstaining on this vote, India is saying that we don't care about human rights. And this has a lot of implications for what the Indian government has done in Kashmir. It has a lot of implications for that ridiculous bill called the Citizenship Amendment Act. So, we need to face facts that India is basically violating the spirit of the UN Charter. I think this is a serious issue, and I'm very glad that the CPIM has taken this up. I just want to make about 4 points just to bring the structure of what's going on to the surface. Look, let's face facts. There's been no history of anti-Semitism in the Arab world, least of all in Palestine. None. There's no history of anti-Semitism. And do you know why we know that? We know that because the entire vocabulary of anti-Semitism comes from Europe. The term ghetto, for instance, small neighborhood where people are forced to live. Ghetto is an Italian word. This comes from the Venetian ghetto of 1516. It doesn't come from the ghetto in Jerusalem or the ghetto in Jaffa or something like that. There's no ghetto there. The ghetto is in Venice. Then the term pogrom. Pogrom is not an Arabic word. Pogrom is not even a Farsi word. Pogrom is a word that doesn't come from North Africa. Pogrom is a word that comes from the horrible atrocities against Jewish people conducted in the Tsarist Empire, conducted in Poland, conducted in the rim of Germany. That's where the term pogrom comes from. It's a Russian word. A pogrom, Russian. Ghetto, Italian. None of these are Arabic. Europe has a long history of anti-Semitism. Terrible history of anti-Semitism culminates in the Holocaust. What does Europe do about its anti-Semitism? It exports Jews to Palestine. That's what Europe does. Rather than Europe dealing with its own racist history, it takes the Jews and says, we don't want to live with you, you go and live over there. Face facts. That's what happened in 1948. That's what the Nakba essentially is. The Nakba is Europe exporting its own ridiculously dangerous history of anti-Semitism and racism into the Palestinian world. The Palestinians have had to, for 8 decades and more, 100 years almost, Palestinians have had to pay the price for European anti Semitism. That's the first point I want to make. That it's not that Palestine has some malignant anti-Semitic history and doesn't like Jews, nothing like that. If you go and read the Hamas charter from 2017, Hamas in its charter says we have no problem with Jews. We have a problem with the state of Israel. I recommend people go and read the Hamas charter, because all the propaganda you get about Hamas being anti-Semitic, Palestinians being anti-Semitic, of this being some sort of problem with Jews, it's totally propaganda. You know who has a problem with Jews? Europeans. They've had a problem for 400 plus years, not the Arabs. So that's the first point I want to make. Second point I want to make, and because this is germane to the experience of India as well, is, as Arwa said, the Palestinians since Balfour, since 1917, in other words, over 100 years, the Palestinians have experienced a permanent catastrophe. The word Nakba means catastrophe. They have experienced a permanent catastrophe. This catastrophe doesn't just happen in 1948. It's permanent. It happens every day. It happens in the humiliations of checkpoints. It happens in families not able to see each other. It happens in the punctual bombing against Gaza, the humiliations wrought against people in East Jerusalem, not just Sheikh Jarrah, but also Silwan, constant threat of eviction against people, the settlement activity, which is totally contrary to international law inside the West Bank, and the great humiliation of watching anybody of Jewish heritage return to Israel, but no Palestinian allowed the right to return, a right to return which is sanctified by UN Resolution 194. That humiliation is daily. That catastrophe is daily. And I want to underline this. This is precisely what the Indian government is doing to the Muslim population inside India, creating a permanent catastrophe for people, making people feel insecure, making people feel like they don't belong, making people feel like this is not their country. This is a permanent catastrophe that is visited upon people, and it is outrageous. If you don't stand and speak up on this stuff, I don't know what is going to encourage you to speak up for human rights, for common decency. CAA, for instance, NPR, NRC, these are contrary to common decency, frankly. The BJP policy in India towards minorities is contrary to common decency. And what the Israelis are doing every day against the Palestinians is contrary to common decency. I'm not even talking politics here. Families cannot meet each other. If you live in East Jerusalem, you can't meet a family member inside the West Bank. If you live inside the armistice lines of 1949, Israel proper, if you live in Nazareth, you can't visit family members who just live across, a wall. You can't visit them. That's contrary to common decency. And that is what we must stand up against. We have to stand up against the ill treatment of a people for 100 years, and families not able to encounter each other, and so on. That's the second point. I'm running through them, Malavika, because I want to get to the main point, which is about the Indian government in a second. The third point, look, Donald Trump created a so-called deal of the century with the United Arab Emirates, with Morocco, these countries, with Kuwait, normalizing relations with Israel, normalizing relations. Let's pick up what these are, because this is germane to India. Let's pick up what these are. Morocco said they will normalize with Israel. They got an arms deal with the United States. And the United States said that we give you permission, as if the United States is the king of the planet, emperor. They can give permission. We give you permission to take Western Sahara. Okay, arms deal and the permission to occupy. What did they do to the Emiratis, the UAE? They said to the UAE, we'll give you an arms deal and we give you permission to bomb Yemen. What is that? An arms deal and a permission to decimate a population. What did they say to the Israelis? We're going to continue to give you not $4 billion a year, friends. It's $4 billion a year from the US government plus $8 billion of loan guarantees. That is a total of $12 billion a year. It's not just 4 billion. This is a wrong number. It's 12 billion, because it's $8 billion of loan guarantees. That's free money. $12 billion a year. And what can you do? Occupy the Palestinians. We don't care. You can do anything. We're moving our embassy to Jerusalem. You have the right. You crazy Zionist settlers have a right to go into Silwan. You have a right to go into Sheikh Jarrah. You can abuse people. You can stand outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque and chant for the burning down of the mosque. I don't know if you saw that. It's scandalous, that behavior. See what's similar in all this. What's similar in all this is what the United States government said is, we want to sell arms to all these monarchies because they're not democracies. Morocco is a harsh monarchy. The United Arab Emirates is not a democracy, it's a harsh monarchy. We're going to sell arms to these monarchies, and then they're allowed to destroy people outside their boundaries. In other words, the deal of the century not only throws the Palestinians under the bus, also the Sahrawi people, also the Yemeni people. And by the way, India already got its deal of the century, because India already gets arms from Israel and the United States, and nobody is going to criticize the abrogation of Article 370 on Kashmir. United States not going to allow any criticism of that. India can do whatever it wants. What's the difference between the deal made to Morocco and the deal made with the Modi government? It's very, very similar deal. We'll sell you arms, and then you do whatever you want to your minority populations. We won't criticize you. As long as you stand with Israel, as long as you, what did the Ministry of External Affairs say in the middle of this bombing of Gaza? I just saw that statement and I was shocked. Here's what he said. He said that, we are following the events. Following what events? It is a murderous bombardment. Entire families we're following the events closely, he says. And we're going to look and see this Israel-Palestine problem. It's not a problem, boss. It's not a problem. It's an occupation. It's slaughter. It's contrary to international law. What problem are you talking about? When the Indian Ministry of External Affairs starts to use language so imprecisely, you have to wonder about the intelligence of the people in government. Either they're being disingenuous, they're using these words deliberately, or they don't know what they're talking about. It's one or the other. Either they're ignorant or they are acting contrary to the UN Charter. I would prefer to imagine that they're acting contrary to the UN Charter, because at least then they're intelligent people who have views that we don't agree with, rather than that we're governed by incompetent people who don't know what they're saying. I'd prefer them to be malicious people who we don't agree with than incompetent people, because incompetent people, that's really scary. I fear that it's a mix of the two. Look at the COVID response in India. It's a mix of incompetence and maliciousness. And we see the same in this regard. So India is actually a beneficiary, in a sense, of the deal of the century. We don't talk about the deal of the century with India because it happens before, but India is a beneficiary. Okay. In this regard, India, which is the world's largest importer of weapons, I don't know if people know that. India, one of the world's poorest countries till today, industrial country, one of the poorest countries in the world, is the largest importer of weapons in the world. I wonder if people know that. Forget all this make in India bogus that Modi was talking about. There's no make in India. There's import weapons into India. And guess where you import them from? 50% of the arms produced by the Israeli armaments industry is imported by India. India imports 50% of Israel's arms that Israel exports. That means India is financially underwriting the occupation of the Palestinians. It's not just support in the Human Rights Council. If India stopped buying arms from Israel tomorrow, this would greatly damage the public finances of the Israeli government. It would make it harder for them. They wouldn't get the blank check to oppress the Palestinians. It's very important for us to put pressure on the Indian government to stop buying arms from Israel. The priority of any campaign in India is not what the government says in the Human Rights Council, but we must stop buying arms from Israel. It is BDS against the arms purchases that Indian government does from Israel. That has to be the priority. Finally, last point. 1974, the United Nations said a people under occupation has the right to resist. It's a UN resolution. People under occupation has a right to resist. Israel has no right to self-defense. Israel is an occupying power. That occupation has been basically put in place by UN Resolution 242. UN Resolution 242 acknowledges that Israel occupies East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. And that's why, for instance, a settlement policy is a violation of international law. It violates 242. If you're an occupying power, you're not supposed to change the facts on the ground. You're supposed to maintain, you have some responsibilities toward the people you occupy. No, it violates 242 by settlements, by evictions in Sheikh Jarrah, and so on. Now, it's an occupying power. It doesn't have a right to self-defense. When Ned Price, the White House spokesperson, was asked by Saeed Arakat of Al-Quds and asked by Matt Lee of the Associated Press, you say that Israel has a right to self-defense. What about the Palestinians? Do they also have a right to self-defense? And he kept saying, I don't have anything to say on that. They don't have anything to say on that because they know they don't have a leg to stand on. They don't have a leg to stand on. The United States government is totally immoral and disingenuous on this issue. Israel is an occupying power. The UN has said that people under occupation have the right to resist. They can use any means necessary. You need to do civil disobedience like the Great March of 2018-2019 to the Gaza perimeter fence, or you want to fire a rocket, or you want to put a balloon up. You can do whatever you want because you have the right to resist. What is going to end your right to resist isn't bombardment, but it's the end of the occupation. The legal method to end is Palestinian right to resist is to the end the occupation. That's it. There's no other way. You can bomb the Palestinians as much as you want. You have to kill them all, because to the last Palestinian, people will resist. That's been very clear in the history. So the Palestinians have a right to resist, but Israel actually doesn't have a right to self-defense. What are you defending from? You can't defend from people you've occupied. International law doesn't talk about self-defense in the realm of the occupier and the occupied. When you've occupied a people, only the occupied have a right to resist the occupation. You don't have a right to self-defense. You have used force against a people. You have already occupied them. Then how can you occupy a people and say we have a right to self-defense? What self-defense? You've occupied them. You come into my house. You come into my house. I throw a brick at you coming into my house. You can't say you can't throw a brick. I have a right to self-defense. You get out of my house. Why are you in my house? You see, that's the basis of international law. You can't walk into somebody's house, occupy the house, and then expect them not to resist you. They are saying, get out of my house. That's the right to resist. Then if they are saying, get out of my house, you don't have a right to self-defense when I say, get out of my house. Get out of my house. You don't have the right to be in here. If you stand out in your own house and then I throw a brick into your house, then you have a right to resist. But what are you doing in my house? Okay, that's the basis of international law. So this ridiculous idea of right to self-defense, it doesn't exist. It's an illusion. That's why Ned Price, standing in front of Matt Lee of the Associated Press, Saeed Arakat of Al-Quds, couldn't answer anything. He was mumbling around because they don't have a basis to answer the question. So let's not have all these illusions that the Indian media is circulating, about, Israel is being attacked and it has the right to self-defense. It's all nonsense. People don't know what they're talking about. It's incoherent. They need to go out there, download a copy of the UN Charter and read it. In fact, I would like to say to everybody watching, do me a favor, don't read anything else. Don't bother with anything we have been talking about. Just spend the rest of the evening today reading the UN Charter. It might help you, not only in this issue, but also trying to understand the Modi government. I see Subhash here. Subhash wrote for Leftward Books a book called Modi Nama. Subhash, you made a mistake in that book. You should have ended the book by saying, please go and read the UN Charter. I think next time we print the book, we're going to just print the UN Charter as the appendix. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Vijay. And that was so many important things that you talked about. And I think one of the most important takeaways for all of us is basically where you started by talking about that how we need to take up stand in our own country against the kind of things that the particular government, which really trying to align itself with Israeli Zionism, what Arwa talked about, and that kind of a thing. And that makes a complete sense, because that is why we are here standing and saying that, yes, we want to stand with Palestine. And this is not done. And it's very important to understand what is the real story. And that's the way you ended the whole thing, that what we need to read, and not the media, what has been projecting. And nowadays, everybody's talking about this WhatsApp universities, what comes up. And there's a horrible trolling that goes on, and what kind of messages that get circulated. It's a very important that all three of you just talked about. And there are like many questions have come for all of you. So let me just go through them and give it to you one by one. There is one question for Nilu Damle, sir. There are two questions. First, I'm starting with you. So there are these questions. Do you see a change in India's stand on Palestine-Israel issue in the near future if the right-wing government stays in power for long? And do you think that religion is the most important point of conflict? Or are there any other sides to the conflict as well? So that's two questions for you, Damle sir. Yeah.
मला एक पुन्हा सांगा. पहिलं उदाहरण एक कारण गडबड होते माझी.
आता एक मिनिट मी परत सांगते.
एक विचारा, मी त्याला उत्तर देतो.
हो. सो पहिला प्रश्न असा आहे की इंडियाचा जो स्टँड आहे ऑन द पॅलेस्टाईन इस्रायल इश्यू, त्याच्यामध्ये डू यू सी चेंज इन इंडिया स्टँड, त्याच्यामध्ये काही चेंज दिसतोय का, कन्सिडरिंग नियर फ्युचर इफ द राईट विंग गव्हर्नमेंट स्टेज इन पॉवर? म्हणजे मोदी गव्हर्नमेंट जर का राहिलं, पुढे चालू राहिलं राईट विंग गव्हर्नमेंट, तर त्याच्यामध्ये काही चेंज दिसतोय का, हा पहिला प्रश्न. सो इफ तुम्हाला त्याचा उत्तर द्यायचं असेल तर.
आता बघा की उदाहरणार्थ विजय प्रसाद म्हणाले ना, त्यांनी खूप छान सगळा एक पर्स्पेक्टिव्ह दिला. भारताच्या बाबतीत गडबड अशी आहे की स्टँड एक आणि प्रत्यक्षामध्ये वागणूक दुसरी. पूर्वी हे नव्हतं. म्हणजे मला असं वाटतं की आज सुद्धा जर ऑफिशियली विचारलं तर आम्ही पॅलेस्टिनच्या बाजूला उभे असं म्हणणार, पण आतून वेगवेगळ्या प्रकारचे संबंध वाढवले जातात. त्यामुळे ऑफिशियली संबंधामध्ये आज घडीला फरक पडेल का, मला वाटत नाही. आज घडीला तसंच राहील, पण आतून त्यांनी सुचवलं तर त्यांच्याकडून शस्त्र घेणं, त्यांची माणसं आणणं, आपली माणसं त्यांच्याकडे पाठवणं, असं ते होण्याची शक्यता आहे. ऑफिशियल स्टँड नाही, आतून बदलते. पहिला प्रश्नाचं उत्तर.
दुसरा प्रश्न असा आहे सर की डू यू थिंक दॅट रिलिजन इज द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टंट पॉइंट ऑफ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट? म्हणजे धर्म हा मेन कॉन्फ्लिक्टचा मुद्दा आहे का, आणि किंवा का त्याला अजून काही साइड्स आहेत त्या ह्याला?
नाही, मला असं वाटतं की इस्रायल पॅलेस्टिनच्या प्रश्नामध्ये धर्म हा मुद्दा गौण आहे. मुळामध्ये हा घरात घुसलेल्या धटिंगणांचा प्रश्न आहे. आता धटिंगणाचा काहीतरी एक धर्म आहे म्हणून आपण ते सोडून देऊ. त्यामुळे मला असं दिसतं की दादागिरी आहे, आणि ही दादागिरी कशी सॉल्व्ह करायची असा प्रश्न याच्यामध्ये धर्म येत नाही मुळामध्ये. पण त्याला ज्या छटा येतात, आता या छटा दुर्दैवाने धर्मातून मांडल्या जातात. म्हणजे मला ज्यावेळी तुमच्याशी मारामारी करायची असते त्यावेळी माझी मारामारी एका मुद्द्यावर असते, परंतु प्रत्यक्षमध्ये ते घडवून आणण्यासाठी धर्माचा वापर केला जातो. अशा अर्थाने धर्म हा सगळ्या जगभर महत्वाचा आहे. आणि अशा अर्थाने मी म्हणतो की मी असं बघतोय, धर्मावर बोलणारे, हिरिरीने बोलणारे हे मुळामध्ये धर्म पाळतच नाहीत. सगळ्या जगभर तुम्हाला दिसेल की उदाहरणार्थ ट्रम्प होता, ट्रम्पच्या आयुष्यामध्ये काय धर्म आहे? कोणत्या नीतिमूल्य या माणसाने आयुष्यामध्ये धर्माची पाळली? इव्हॅन्जेलिकल म्हणतो, काय पाळलं त्यांनी? भारतामध्ये उदाहरणार्थ आहे, भारतामध्ये हे हिंदुत्वाची बाजू घेणारी माणसं आहे, यांच्या जीवनामध्ये धर्माची बाजू काही नाही. साधारणपणे तुमच्या आमच्या घरामध्ये जी माणसं आपण ज्याला धर्मभिरू, पापभिरू अशी माणसं जी म्हणतात की जी चांगल्या नीतिमत्तेने वागणारी असतात, ही मुळामध्ये राजकारणातली धर्माचा वापर करणारी माणसं आहेत. ही धार्मिक नव्हेतच, हे अतिशय वाईट लोक आहेत. त्यामुळे धर्म इश्यू ज्यावेळी सार्वजनिकरित्या उच्चारला जातो त्यावेळी मला असं वाटतं की ते भांडण धर्माचं नसून धर्माचा वापर राजकारणासाठी करणं अशा अर्थाने, आणि तो वापर अर्थातच होतोय, नेत्यानाहू करतोय आणि सर्व लोक करतायत. त्यामुळे मला असं वाटतं की लोकांचं प्रबोधन करत असताना लोकांना धर्म जरा बाजूला ठेवा, धर्माचा स्वतंत्रपणे विचार करा. धर्म हा सार्वजनिक व्यवहारामध्ये आणू नका, हा ह्याच्यातला मूळ प्रश्न आहे. इस्रायली लोक घुसले, दुसऱ्या देशामध्ये घुसले, तिथल्या लोकांना मारलं. आता त्यांचं काय करायचं असा प्रश्न तुम्ही घ्या. धर्माच्या बाबतीत तुम्ही जाऊ नका, कारण ते डेंजरस आहे असं मला वाटतं.
Thank you. Arpa, there are questions for you. Can I ask you a question now, Arpa?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So there is first question for you is we have only occasionally heard that Palestinian community comprises not only of Muslims but also Christians and Jews. What has been your experience of all the religions coming together to resist Israel's violence? Could you share some light on this? That's the first question, and there are a few more.
Can you please repeat the text of the question?
I'll do that. So there is this question is that basically it has been heard that Palestinian community comprises not only of Muslims but also Christians and Jews. And what has been your experience of whether these all religions have come together, people from these religions have come together to resist the Israeli violence?
Okay, so actually most of the Palestinians are Muslims, but also we have Christians, almost around 3% of the population in Palestine, Muslims. And we have also Jews in Nablus, and very few percent, I don't know, less than 1%, less for sure. And I think when it comes to resistance against Israel, we don't think about religion. We think as Palestinians. All Palestinians resist the occupation, no matter they are Muslims or Christians or Jews. This is not, we don't think about our religions when we struggle against Israel. This is the first thing. Israel tries sometimes to use this. They sometimes try to give some privileges to Christian people, Palestinian Christian people, and sometimes they try to give some privileges to Druze, which Muslims inside Israel. But Palestinians actually are aware of this. Of Israel trying to use this division between Palestinians, and this really doesn't matter the Palestinians' resistance. All people from all religions struggle against Israel.
Right. The second question is that is there any new leadership coming up from Palestine side? That is the second question. And the third question is that why are Arab countries hesitant to enter to help?
So regarding the second question, if there is a new leader, formally no. The leader of Palestine still is the PA, the formal leader. But of course, during the situation, there is a kind of field leaders from youth and people who are in the streets. They became kind of leaders, but not formal. And we think we need actually a new leader for Palestine, a new leader that deserve to be leaders for Palestinians, because actually Palestinians are very angry with the Palestinian Authority. And this is for your second question. For your third question, why Arab doesn't enter? Actually, we have to distinguish between two things when we're talking about Arab. We have to distinguish between people and between the regimes, the Arab regimes. People are with full support with Palestinians, and we saw marches and protests and solidarity protests in all countries in the Arab world. And we always hear how that people, if they can enter the Palestine, they with all love and all courage, they want to struggle with Palestinians, but for sure they can't. And we saw how the Jordanian people come across the borders to send their solidarity with Palestinians. And also we saw how Lebanese also come to the borders also to send their solidarity with Palestinians. And there was a Lebanese guy, his name is Muhammad al-Tahan, who was also killed during these protests in the border. But for the regimes, I think Vijay said it clearly about how the Arab regimes normalize with Israel. So, and many of the, not many, I believe all of Arab regimes in the Arab countries, they are exist in power because of they supported by United States. And if United States support you, so you have to do what United States tell you to do. So it's clear they won't struggle with the Palestinians. They can say in media they stand with Palestine, but in real, in the ground, we know that the Arab regimes doing normalization with Israel, and we saw Morocco, Emirates, Sudan, and other countries. That's it.
Yeah, I think you made a very important point, Arva, that we have to separate between regimes and the people who are ready to support. And that's, I think, a very important point. Thank you for that. Next few questions are for Vijay. So there are these 2-3 questions. Why are the US and Israel so friendly? Then what are the 2-state solution and the 1-state solution? So that's second question. And can I also read out the third one, or okay, and can we call it a story of modern colonialism? That's the third one. Yeah. Vijay, you're speaking on mute.
I'm just getting the questions down.
Sure. So I'm just reading it out.
2-state, 1-state, modern colonialism, and
yes. And why are US and Israel so friendly? Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. I will start with, is it modern colonialism? Well, the answer is yes, it is. And but it's not colonialism of the old sort. It has its own character, its own structure. Look, it's not really colonialism, okay, because there's a side to this which is annihilationism. Yes, it's true that in Israel and in the settlements and so on, Palestinian labor is essential. It's the Palestinians that are the working class of very large sections of the Israeli settler project. But the Israeli settler project has also substituted Palestinian workers for imported labor. So when you visit the, let's say, kibbutzes in northern Galilee and so on near the Lebanese border, there are lots of workers from Thailand who have come in to work there. So the Israeli state project is substituting Palestinian workers with workers from abroad, bringing migrant workers in. Essentially, you have to understand the Israeli project as being annihilationist in this way. Israel wants the Palestinians, they're raising the pain against it so that they will then flee to Jordan, to Lebanon, to Egypt to get out of there. So it's not actually colonialism of the classic form. It's actually land grab. It's an old land grab. This is what, for instance, the colonizers in the United States did to the native peoples. You know, it's a land grab. Get them out of here. Clear the land. It's what Hitler wanted to do in Europe, what he called making a Lebensraum, you know, the living space. This is a Lebensraum policy, essentially. And I know it's provocative to use that kind of parallel, but I mean, it's similar to what the people in the United States did to the Native Americans. So it's that kind of colonialism. There is no requirement to use Palestinians as labor because you can import the labor, as they've been doing, as I said, regarding Thai workers and so on. Um, so the second point about why is the United States so close to Israel? Well, that is also something of interest, because it's not that the United States was always had such fealty to Israel. The US has had very close ties to the Arab states for reasons of oil and geopolitics. This relationship with Israel has only deepened since 1967. It doesn't go back to 1948. It's only deepened since 1967. It has something to do with evangelical Christians and their anti Semitic view that the Jews need to create the second temple and then they'll all die so that evangelical Christians can go to God. They are really genocidal in the way they think of Jews, but they also support Israel as a consequence. So there's a complex set of reasons why the United States and Israel has a thing. But I want to get to the most important question of the one state, two state debate. This is not a useful debate, because the issue is not for us to solve the question in the Levant. You and I don't have to solve the question. This is a issue that the Palestinians need to solve, that the people in the Israeli state project need to solve. It's not an issue that you and I solved abstractly. In the same way, one doesn't abstractly say, oh, this is the perfect solution to a conflict, because there's no perfect solution to a conflict. What's the perfect solution in Kashmir? I mean, I'll ask you, there's no perfect solution. All solutions are imperfect because there are competing interests. There are deeply, and these competing interests are deeply resonant in people's lives. There are meaningful differences and so on. So in this case, the idea of the one state solution is the most beautiful idea. Everybody live, in one state which is democratic and secular, but it's totally utopian. It's a totally utopian, nonsensical demand. And here's why it's nonsensical. Inside Israel, during this murderous bombardment, 72% of the Israeli population wanted the war to continue. The opposition politicians who are going to come in if Netanyahu doesn't form a cabinet, whether it's Naftali Bennett or even Yapid or any of these people, they are all murderous when it comes to the Palestinians. There is no liberal Israeli political faction. There just isn't. I mean, there is none. Benny Gantz, who ran against Netanyahu, is his defense minister. And during this war, he said, we're going to keep bombing Gaza till it's completely quiet. That was Benny Gantz, who ran to the left of Netanyahu. So, there is no appetite inside Israel to not annihilate the Palestinian movement. Secondly, Israel is committed to being a Jewish state. That Jewish state idea is an apartheid idea. You can't have a Jewish state and then have 50% of the populations being Palestinian and the 50% being second-class citizens. So the one-state solution, it's a beautiful idea, but there is no social and political basis for it. If you see what I mean, there is none. The two-state solution. Now, a two-state solution is what is accepted at Oslo. It's what the PLO accepted and so on. This is supposed to include Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. What two-state solution? Half of the West Bank has been taken over by settlements. The Israelis want to take over East Jerusalem. They are not leaving even a shred of a two-state. The Israeli policy is invalidating the two-state solution. So however logical and practical a two-state solution could be, Israel is making it impossible. The only solution that Israel wants is to have an apartheid relationship to Palestinians inside the region and to expel Palestinians to other countries. So I just don't want people to live in an illusion. Let's have a one state, everything will be fine. It's like people who talk about the Kashmir solution saying, well, it should get self-determination. What does that mean? What does it mean for Kashmir to be have self? Do you want the Srinagar Valley to be like, in a kind of condominium status? Is it to be like Bhutan? Is it to be like Nepal? I mean, what are you talking about? Do you think the contest between India and Pakistan that is worked out over Kashmir, do you think that contest is going to end because you've created a condominium in Srinagar? No. The principal issue between India and Pakistan is between India and Pakistan. The Kashmiris just pay the price for this particular contest. So, you can have any kind of dreamy, idealistic, utopian idea. We have to have some hard facts in front of us, that there are difficult and dangerous interests that are competing. These have to be absorbed. We need to find a way forward. We all want to reach utopia. I mean, I'm a communist. I want to live in a communist society. But I recognize full well that it's a protracted path. We can't have an illusion that tomorrow you can create communism in the world. The socialist path on the way is very long. In the same regard, the one state idea, it's a beautiful idea, guys. We all instinctively, because we are all humanists, instinctively we like the one state idea. But practically, it's an apartheid state. It means institutionalizing apartheid, condemning the Palestinians to be second-class citizens.
A very important thing that you just talked about, and it resonates with so much that has been going on with the questions of NRC and CAA and how to deal with that, and so many things, the questions that came up during those protests and everything. There are a few more questions to all of you. दामले सर, तुमच्यासाठी एक प्रश्न आलेला आहे तो, after Trump and new political development in Israel against Netanyahu, can we say the world is rejecting right-wing forces? And what can you say about India? Why India should stand in solidarity with Palestine?
जरा तुमचं माळे सुटी करा.
Sure. So प्रश्न असा आहे की ट्रम्प नंतर न्यू पॉलिटिकल डेव्हलपमेंट इन इस्रायल, म्हणजे तो नेत्यानाहू जो आहे, इस्रायल अगेन्स्ट नेत्यानाहू, कॅन वी से द वर्ल्ड इज रिजेक्टिंग राईट विंग फोर्सेस, असा प्रश्न आहे.
एक मिनिट. मला असं वाटतं हे राईट विंग फोर्सेस रिजेक्ट होत आहेत वगैरे असं काही घडत नाहीये. अमेरिकेतही घडत नाहीये आणि कुठेही घडत नाहीये. त्यामुळे राईट विंग लेफ्ट विंग हे एका परीने इररिलेव्हंट आहे. आणि या प्रश्नाच्या बाबतीत तर आहेच आहे. आता विजय हे म्हणाले ना, तसं खूप कॉम्प्लेक्स एकमेकांमध्ये गोष्टी अडकलेल्या आहेत. आणि त्यामुळे राईट विंग आणि लेफ्ट विंग, मला तर अलीकडच्या काळामध्ये वाटतं की राईट लेफ्ट सेंटर वगैरे हे सगळं आता आपण सोडून द्यावं. ही लेबल आहेत, ह्या लेबलांना काही अर्थ उरलेला नाही. त्यामुळे तसं काय घडतंय असं दिसत नाही. भारतामध्ये सुद्धा लोक राईट विंगला रिजेक्ट करतायत वगैरे असं काही मला काय घडेल असं वाटत नाही. कारण राईट विंगचा तुम्हाला आम्हाला समजणारा अर्थ, लोकांना समजणारा अर्थ, हे सगळं घोटाळाच आहे सगळा. राईट कशाला म्हणायचं? म्हणजे तुमची सेंटर लाईन काय असते? तर मला वाटतं असं काही घडताना दिसत नाहीये. आणि जगभरचे इश्यूज खूप बदललेत असं मला वाटतं. आणि आता जे म्हणाले त्याच्यावर मला एक बारीकशी रिॲक्शन, ते त्यांनी विजयनी सांगितलं ना, विजय प्रसादनी, ते बरोबर आहे की हे इस्रायलचा प्रश्न टू स्टेट सोल्युशनचं सुटणार नाही. माझ्या असं लक्षात येतं की इथून पुढल्या जगाची रचना ही युटोपिया नव्हे, परंतु कुठल्या बाजूने राहणार, की माणसं जिथे कुठे असतील, जिथे कुठे जातील, तिथे तिथे माणसांना त्यांचे अधिकार आणि स्वातंत्र्य तुम्हाला दिलं पाहिजे. सॉव्हरीन, नॉन सॉव्हरीन, म्हणजे उदाहरणार्थ भारतामध्ये काही लोक आहेत, आता समजा ते मुसलमान आहेत, त्यांना भारताची नागरिकत्व द्यायचं की नाही वगैरे ह्या प्रश्नावर सगळं चालू आहे. ते अफगाणिस्तानात द्यायचं की नाही वगैरे. मला असं लक्षात येत आहे की संबंध जगभरचा प्रश्न असं की माणसाला जगण्यासाठी स्टेट काय करतं. मला असं दिसतंय की सर्व ठिकाणी स्टेट ज्या रीतीने डेव्हलप होत आहे, म्हणजे राजकारण आणि माणसं याच्यामधलं जे आता जो क्लिवेज आहे, मला असं दिसतंय की माणसाचे अधिकार वगैरे सगळं नाकारून जाऊन स्टेट चालवणं असं चाललेलं आहे. ते धर्माच्या बाबतीत नाही किंवा भाषेच्या बाबतीत नाही, कुठल्याही बाबतीमध्ये नाही. आता महाराष्ट्राच्या बाबतीमध्ये जे मोदी सरकारचं जे वागणं आहे, तर काय धर्माचा आधार आहे? काही आधार नाही. पण तरी सुद्धा महाराष्ट्रीयन माणसं मरू देत, खड्ड्यात जाऊ देत, अशा रीतीने मोदी सरकार वागतं. याला आधार काय तुम्ही देणार? आता इथे काय महाराष्ट्रातली माणसं काही नागरिकत्वाचे अधिकार मागणार का? महाराष्ट्रातली माणसं असं म्हणणार की भारतामध्ये कुठल्या माणसांनी राहावं? नाही. कुठल्याही स्टेटमधले कुठली माणसं राहिली तरी राजकारणातली माणसं त्यांचे अधिकार त्यांना नाकारून त्यांना जगणं नाकारतात, हा इश्यू आहे. त्यामुळे पॅलेस्टाईनच्या बाबतीत मला तुम्ही विचारलं तर माझ्या दृष्टीने प्रश्न एक असा आहे की पहिली गोष्ट हिंसा थांबवली पाहिजे. आणि हिंसा थांबवण्यासाठी जे जे लोकांना करावं लागेल ते केलं पाहिजे. म्हणजे अमेरिकेला दादागिरी करायला लागेल, भारताला की नथिंग, तुमची हिंसा करू देणार नाही. नंबर 2, पॅलेस्टिनी माणसांना सुखाने जगता येईल याची सोय तुम्हाला करावी लागेल, ते जिथे कुठे असतील तिथे. म्हणजे 2 स्टेट होणार नाही तोपर्यंत वेस्ट बँकमध्ये किंवा गाझामध्ये माणसं आहेत की नाही, त्याला जगायचं की नाही. का इथे जोपर्यंत 2 स्टेट सोल्युशन होणार नाही तोपर्यंत पुढले 50 वर्षे त्यांना तुम्ही मारत राहणार नाही. मला असं वाटतं की सगळ्या जगातल्या माणसांना असा विचार करावा लागेल की पॅलेस्टिनी माणसं जिथे आहेत त्यांना त्यांचं आरोग्य, शिक्षण हे उभं करण्यासाठी भरघोस मदत लोकांनी केली पाहिजे. म्हणजे भारताच्या बाबतीत मला विचारलं तर मी म्हणेन की मी जाऊन तिकडे युनिव्हर्सिटी उभं करायला मदत करेन. मी त्यांना म्हणेन की तुमची आरोग्य व्यवस्था करायला मी तुम्हाला मदत करेन. राजकारण सगळं सोडून द्या. कारण पॅलेस्टिनी माणसाला आरोग्य, शिक्षण, रोजगार या 3 गोष्टी मिळाल्या पाहिजेत, ज्या इस्रायल नाकारते. प्रश्न तिथे आहे, इस्रायल त्यांना ते नाकारते, सेकंड रेट सिटिझनशिप. आणि माझं म्हणणं आहे की हा एका अर्थाने मानवतावादी दृष्टिकोन आहे. तेव्हा 2 स्टेट सोल्युशन काय करायचं असेल तर केव्हा ते करा, पण ऍज इट इज जिथे जिथे माणसं आहे तिथे तिथे त्या माणसांना जगणंच सुकर करा या दृष्टीने जावं लागेल, जे भारतात सुद्धा आहे. भारतात सुद्धा तुम्ही असंख्य लोकांना जगणंच नाकारताय, त्यांना शाश्वती नाकारताय. म्हणजे रोजगार नाही नाकारला, शाश्वती नाकारली. रस्त्यावर तुम्हाला भीती वाटेल, तुम्ही कुठल्या धर्माचे आहात म्हणून तुम्हाला काय मारतील असं काही सांगता येत नाही. आणि जाती जातींमध्ये होत आहे हे भाषा भाषांमध्ये पुन्हा हे करू लागलेत लोक. हे फार डेंजरस आहे. आणि मला असं वाटतं, मी तुम्हाला पुन्हा पुन्हा जातोय की राजकारणातली माणसं ही केवळ आपल्याला निवडून यायचं आहे आणि राज्य करायचं आहे यासाठी कोणत्याही एक्सटेंटला आता जातात. त्यांना धर्म, जात, अस्मिता, नीतिमत्ता या सगळ्या गोष्टी सेकंडरी नव्हे, 10व्या याच्यावर आहेत. काही करा आणि मला सत्तेत ठेवा, हे आहे. आणि तेच एक्झॅक्टली नेमकं इस्रायलमध्ये चाललेलं आहे. नेतान्याहू असो, गेन्झ असो, कोणी आले तरी फरक नाही पडणार, हे सगळे एकत्र राहणार. याचं कारण त्यांना काही करून त्यांना अधिकार नाकारून जगायचं आहे, विच इज डेंजरस असं मला वाटतं.
राईट राईट. इट्स अ व्हेरी इम्पॉर्टंट पॉइंट दामले सर, की तुम्ही जे आता सांगितलं वेगवेगळे नेते जे आहेत, म्हणजे इस्रायलमध्ये असेल किंवा अमेरिकेमध्ये असेल किंवा भारतामध्ये असेल, all these leaders are actually talking of the same language, and they are basically talking about rejecting the simple decency that human beings are need to experience wherever they are staying. Basically all these leaders are coming together and talking about the same language, and the first thing that from any country people are going to stand against is that kind of terrorist and apartheid situations that these leaders are trying to push into people's life. That's a very important point that you made. Vijay, there is a question to you and then to Arva. There's a question that what should be the way ahead for international working class is the question for you. So that's the question for you. And yeah, yes. And then I'll ask a question to Arva. It's a very important question to you, Arva, that what would you like to say to people of India? So that's afterwards, Arva. Yeah, Vijay.
What I mean, the question is in general. Well, what's the
Yeah,
international working class in general?
So the
Or
question is
specifically
like,
on Palestine?
no, it is particularly about in the sense what should be the way ahead for international working class in this fight against fascist forces worldwide.
Yes, yes. So, okay, during the bombing of Gaza, dock workers in Italy and dock workers in South Africa refused to allow ships carrying weapons to Israel to proceed. This is a very important development. The working class in Italy, working class in South Africa said no pasaran, a phrase that comes to us from the fight against fascism in Spain. You will not pass. No pasaran, you will not pass. So the working class said, we will not allow these ships to go, and they didn't. In that sense, it raises an interesting question. When the next shipment of Israeli arms comes to India, why does it get offloaded? Why don't the dock workers in India say, we are not going to unload these weapons, take them back? Vapas lo. We are not letting it come here. No pasaran. In the Indian case, it could be vapas lo. Go back, take it back to Israel. We don't want it. You see, the Kisan Sabha, 100 million members or whatever the size of the Kisan Sabha is, it's a huge organization. 4 or 5 years ago, Kisan Sabha passed a resolution saying we support boycott, divest, sanctions against Israel. The most significant mass organization in India to come out in support of BDS against the Israeli apartheid state. Okay, that was the Kisan Sabha about 4 or 5 years ago. You're asking what's the role of the working class? Look to the dock workers of Italy and South Africa. Look to the Kisan Sabha. Why can't every mass organization in India? What about the DYFI? SFI has just released a statement. Student Federation has released such a powerful statement against the war in Gaza. But everybody should endorse the BDS movement, and start putting this in place. What does it mean? What does it mean for transport workers? When Israeli equipment arrives that is used then in Kashmir, as part of the Indian security force apparatus in Kashmir. What happens when that happens? What happens when Israeli officials come in and start to assist the research and analysis wing, RAW, the Indian intelligence? What about Indian intelligence agents? Why should they get involved in all this? I would be interested to see that. We have historical evidence that the Pakistani military, at the time, a battalion led by Ziaul Haq was based in Jordan in 1970 as part of the United States a plan, what was called the Baghdad Pact, the central, the kind of Middle Eastern to Pakistan NATO. It was called CENTO. It was set up as the Baghdad Pact. Ziaul Haq led Pakistani troops against the Palestinians in 1970 in in September 1970, in Jordan. I've written about that. There's very good evidence of the scale of the killing and so on. Why is the Indian government getting involved in that kind of way? We need people to stand up and say, I'm not going to do it. Where are the great dissenters on this? So when you ask the question, what should the working class do? Follow the Italian dock workers, follow the South African dock workers, follow the Indian Kisan Sabha. We need to just say we are not going to be complicit in this grave human rights violation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Absolutely. There is this last question we are taking. Arwa, a very important question that has been asked from the audience, that what would you like to say to India? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
First of all, I would like to thank you and also to thank the Indian people for their solidarity. And even in India, I distinguish between the government and the people. So I would like to thank people for their solidarity. And also, I would like to say that Vijay said that India is one of the poorest country in the world. I believe poverty also is a kind of oppression, and I believe that all oppressed people should struggle together. And every oppression in this world has the same roots. Whether occupation in Palestine or the poverty in India or the violence against people in Colombia, I believe they all have the same roots. So people should have strengthened their ties and solidarity and have a common struggle in order to defeat this enemy. I do believe that capitalist system is this enemy. And thanks a lot. Thanks for you, and thanks for Indian people.
Thank you so much for those wonderful and very powerful words. And we definitely, we've been saying, that we'll be standing with you and also standing in our own country against the operations or injustice that any government is keeping in front of us. So we are ending it here, and I just want to also share one very small video, very absolutely like 1 minute video of photographs, and I want to read out a poem by Faiz Ahmed Faiz, which is written specifically on Palestinian like issue. And just let me share the screen of the photographs, which I have actually downloaded from Google, and let me just do that. Just let me know if you are able to see it. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So this is in Hindi Urdu poem from our great Faiz Ahmed Faiz. फिलिस्तीनी बच्चों के लिए, मत रो बच्चे, रो रो के अभी अम्मी तेरी अम्मी की आंख लगी है, मत रो बच्चे, कुछ ही पहले तेरे अब्बा ने अपने गम से रुखसत ली है, मत रो मेरे बच्चे, तेरा भाई अपने ख्वाब की तितली पीछे दूर कहीं परदेस गया है, मत रो मेरे बच्चे, तेरी बाजी का डोला पराए देश गया है, मत रो मेरे बच्चे, तेरे आंगन में मुर्दा सूरज नहला के गए हैं, चंद्रमा दफना के गए हैं, मत रो मेरे बच्चे, अम्मी अब्बा बाजी भाई चांद और सूरज, तू अगर रोएगा तो ये सब और भी तुझको रुलवाएंगे, तू मुस्काएगा तो शायद सारे एक दिन भेष बदल कर तुझसे खेलने और लौटने आएंगे, मत रो मेरे बच्चे. That's from Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Thank you very much. And these are photographs. One of the photographs I have taken from Arva's wall also. This one is from your wall, Arva. And thank you so much. And it was a wonderful session. Let me just thank everyone. And yeah, so we are basically, I just wanted to also say thank you everyone once again, and I'm also requesting everyone who have been present throughout this 2 hours, a very long session that we had today, but very, very heart-wrenching, heartwarming, and very powerful, inspiring session that we had. It also happened because of obviously the 3 important speakers, and also because of the audience. They asked wonderful questions. I'm requesting the people who couldn't watch, please do tell them that we are on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram by the name of Pune Collective. And thanking you once again. We'll see you soon in the next live session. Stay safe, stay healthy. Enclave Zindabad.